Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Scene, where curiosity slows its pace and the world outside softens just enough for you to let your thoughts drift while we wander into places rarely considered. Tonight our attention turns not to the stars or the ticking of clocks, but to the ocean, vast, dark, and holding secrets so immense that even after centuries of exploration, most of it remains unmapped, unseen, and quietly alive with mysteries. Imagine that right now, as you sit wherever you are, half the planet is cloaked in daylight while the other half is wrapped in night, and beneath both of those shifting skies lies another world of darkness, an ocean so deep it might as well be another universe. It is there, far below the surface, that tiny flickers of light spark and vanish, drifting in the blackness like embers caught in a slow current. These lights don't come from lamps or machines, but from living bodies. They are signals, weapons, disguises, and invitations, and one of the most extraordinary bearers of those lights is the lanternfish. But before we sink further into that darkness, let me ask you something. Where are you right now as you listen to this? Maybe you're in bed, maybe on a couch with headphones in, or maybe you're sitting quietly in a dimly lit room, giving yourself permission to slow down for a while. And as you think about where you are, I'd like you to imagine the place that lies directly below your feet, past the soil, the rock, the groundwater, the continental shelf, and eventually into the cold black water that makes up most of our planet. That's the neighbourhood of the lanternfish, a creature that has no fame, no spotlight, and yet may very well be one of the most influential animals alive today. If you find that kind of thought soothing or curious, or even if you simply enjoy having a calm voice guide you through something new while the day winds down, I'd be grateful if you considered giving this a like or subscribing. It helps this quiet little space reach others who might need it. And don't worry, this isn't the sort of subject that demands sharp focus or quick thinking. The rhythm of the deep sea is slow, patient and forgiving, and I'll follow that same pace here. The ocean is usually spoken about in grand strokes. People think of the roaring waves at the beach, the blue shallows where fish shimmer in the sun, or the far horizon where the sea meets the sky. But those are only thin layers. Below them lies something else entirely, a realm most of us never see and rarely picture with any accuracy. The deeper you go, the less light remains, until the sun itself is only a memory. Scientists call that middle layer the twilight zone, though it might just as easily be called the forgotten zone. It is here that lanternfish live in such overwhelming numbers that they form one of the largest gatherings of life anywhere on Earth, and yet almost nobody outside the world of marine science even knows they exist. That thought alone is enough to make you pause. How can a creature that is so plentiful, so essential to the way the ocean functions, be so invisible in our everyday awareness? It isn't because they're rare. In fact, they may outnumber almost everything else in the sea. It isn't because they're too small to matter. Though modest in size, their collective influence is staggering. Instead, their mystery comes from where they live and how quietly they go about their role. Far below the surface, out of sight, they rise and fall each day in migrations that dwarf the movements of wildebeest or birds across continents. I find it helps to picture them not as isolated fish, but as threads woven through the ocean itself. At dusk, countless lanternfish begin to ascend toward the surface to feed. At dawn, they sink again into the dark, carrying with them the energy of what they've eaten and redistributing it through the depths. This vertical migration happens every single night, a tide of bodies rising and falling in one of the largest daily movements of living things on the planet. It is happening right now as you listen, and it will happen again tomorrow and again the day after that, whether or not any human ever notices. Yet despite all that, when people speak of ocean life, they name whales, sharks, dolphins, or coral reefs. Lanternfish are rarely mentioned, as though hidden by design. Which brings us back to that question that lingers in the dark. Who really controls the abyss but stays unknown? The easy answer would be that no one controls it, that the deep sea is too vast and chaotic for anything to hold sway. But if control means influence, if it means shaping the balance of life in the largest ecosystem on Earth, then perhaps the lanternfish are the closest thing to rulers the abyss has ever known. Their light is faint compared to ours, their bodies fragile compared to the giants of the sea, yet collectively they sustain predators above them and ecosystems below them. They move carbon through the water column, tying the ocean to the climate we depend on. They are everywhere in the darkness, and almost nowhere in conversation. Quiet rulers, unknown monarchs of the midnight sea. So tonight, as we start this long exploration, let yourself imagine being far beneath the surface, where the sun cannot reach, and where the weight of the water is crushing, but the silence is absolute. Imagine small sparks of light drifting in every direction, each one attached to a body no longer than your hand, yet multiplied by billions. These sparks are not for us, they are for each other, for survival, for signalling in a world where vision is limited. And among them swims a population so vast it may shape the destiny of the ocean itself. That is where we're going, and that is where our story begins, not with a single fish or a single fact, but with a recognition that sometimes the most important forces in nature are the ones that remain hidden, operating far from the surface of our attention, quietly, steadily, and with immeasurable effect. The ocean has always had a way of pulling at human imagination. We stand at the shore looking at the horizon and feel both awe and unease, as though something immense waits just beyond our reach. Sailors for centuries told stories about monsters rising from the deep, about ghostly lights flickering across black waters, about things that moved unseen beneath their ships. Those stories weren't just superstition. They were born from the truth that most of the ocean is hidden from us, and when something is hidden, our minds can't help but fill the gap with mystery. The abyss, that realm of near-total darkness far below the surface, remains one of the least explored territories on Earth. Even today, when satellites orbit our skies and robots roll across the surface of Mars, the sea beneath us is still largely unknown. And if there is one creature that embodies the strange mix of invisibility, power, and quiet significance of that realm, it is the lanternfish. The name itself feels almost whimsical, as though someone imagined a fairy tale animal that carries its own lantern to light its way. But lanternfish are real, and the light they make is not decorative. It is biological, chemical, practical, and deeply tied to their survival. They do not glow brightly enough to light your path, but their soft sparks matter in the endless dark. They use them to recognize one another, to attract mates, to confuse predators, to hide in plain sight. These fish are not rare flickers in a forgotten cave. They are everywhere, a scattered population so enormous it reshapes how we should think about the ocean entirely. And yet, you probably hadn't heard of them before tonight, at least not in detail. When you think of the ocean creatures, your mind might go to the giants. Blue whales, sperm whales, colossal squid. Or it might go to the terrifying. The great white shark, the fangtooth, the anglerfish. Lanternfish don't usually make the list. They are small, understated, barely reaching the length of your hand. If you saw one, you might not think much of it. But together they form one of the largest populations of vertebrates on the planet. That's not an exaggeration. Scientists believe that lanternfish might account for as much as 60% of the deep-sea biomass. Imagine that. More than half of the moving, breathing life in the deep belongs to this one type of fish. A fish most people don't even know exists. Think about how strange that is. On land, the animals that dominate in number, like ants or beetles, are at least known to us, if not always appreciated. In the sky, we know that starlings flock and migrations of swallows sweep across continents. But in the sea, the creature that fills the abyss in staggering numbers is mostly absent from our awareness. It's as if Earth had an entire hidden kingdom that never appeared in our stories, our children's books, our popular imagination. Perhaps that is exactly why the lanternfish holds such a strong place in this story. Not because it is showy, but because it thrives in obscurity. When researchers first began to measure the oceans with sonar in the 20th century, they noticed something puzzling. Their instruments kept bouncing signals off a layer deep below the surface, a layer that seemed to rise at night and sink during the day. At first, some thought it might be the ocean floor itself, but the depth shifted too much, rising hundreds of meters each evening, then sinking back again at dawn. They called it the deep scattering layer, and eventually they discovered what it really was. Not the floor, but a vast migration of living things. Billions upon billions of small creatures, including lanternfish, moving up and down with the cycle of light. That discovery shocked the scientific community. Until then, most had imagined the deep sea as barren, with only the occasional oddity living in isolated pockets. The sonar showed something very different. A river of life flowing beneath the surface, pulsing with astonishing regularity. Lanternfish were at the heart of it. To picture this properly, you need to imagine scale. Every evening as the surface darkens, lanternfish rise from depths of 200 to 1,000 meters. They come up towards shallower waters where plankton and smaller prey drift. They feed in the relative safety of night, avoiding the gaze of predators that rely on daylight. Then, as the first hint of dawn approaches, they turn back downward, retreating into the deep where light cannot follow. This cycle happens all across the world, every single day, without pause. It is the largest migration on Earth, measured not in miles across land but in vertical distance through water. It happens so reliably that if you could drain the ocean and watch it from the side, you would see waves of bodies rising at dusk and sinking at dawn like the heartbeat of the sea. Lanternfish are central to that beat. Why does it matter? Because this movement is not just survival for the fish. It redistributes nutrients, it cycles carbon, it feeds larger animals. Without lanternfish and their nightly commute, the ocean's balance would collapse. Whales depend on them, squid hunt them, tuna chase them, penguins dive after them. They are prey for countless species that humans also rely on, and by sinking deep during the day with stomachs full of surface plankton, lanternfish carry carbon down into the depths, effectively storing it away from the atmosphere. In a quiet, unseen way, they are part of Earth's climate system. They help regulate the very air we breathe, and yet they do so from a place almost no one visits. This is where the mystery deepens. We know they exist, we know they are abundant, and yet so many of their behaviours remain unclear. How exactly do they coordinate these massive migrations? How do they avoid overfeeding the surface waters? How do they manage to stay hidden despite their numbers? What predators rely on them most, and how fragile is that balance? For all the research done so far, there is still far more we don't know than what we do. In that sense, the lanternfish is not just a creature but a symbol of how little we truly understand about the deep. There is something humbling about realizing that. We walk on land, build cities, launch rockets, and yet beneath the surface of our own planet live billions of animals we barely know by name. They are not loud, they are not large, but they are influential in ways we are only beginning to measure. Who really controls the abyss? Not the rare giants that capture headlines, but these small glowing travellers, the lanternfish, moving like clockwork through their hidden empire. And if you let your imagination rest on that picture, you might start to feel a sense of connection to them, even from so far above. Every breath you take is linked in part to the cycling of carbon and oxygen that these migrations influence. Every time you see a whale or a seabird, you're indirectly seeing the impact of lanternfish. They are proof that dominance does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides, unseen, operating quietly until someone finally asks the right question. The abyss has always beckoned with its mysteries, and lanternfish are among its greatest. Small, luminous and overlooked, they hold the threads of an ecosystem we cannot afford to ignore. The deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that the unknown rulers of the dark are not monsters or myths, but countless flickering bodies drifting together in silence. And as we continue further, their story only grows more complex, more surprising, and more vital to the way we understand life on this planet. When we look at the ocean from the shore, it feels impossible that something so vast could ever be ruled at all. The waves roll in endlessly, tides pull with the rhythm of the moon, storms churn and break without warning. It seems like chaos, and in that chaos, no single creature could possibly be in charge. That impression only grows when you consider the deep sea, a place beyond the reach of sunlight, where pressure builds to crushing levels and temperatures drop near freezing. Down there, the idea of control seems laughable. How can anything rule in a place so alien that even the machines we send often falter under the weight? And yet, when scientists study the movement of life in those waters, patterns begin to appear. Patterns so massive, so consistent, that they hint at a kind of quiet order. That order, as strange as it may sound, is shaped in large part by lanternfish. To ask who rules the deep is to first ask what we mean by ruling. On land, we're used to thinking of lions as kings of the savannah, not because they dictate laws, but because their presence shapes the behaviour of other animals. In forests, we might think of elephants as rulers, for their sheer size alters the landscape. In the skies, eagles and hawks exert control as apex predators. But in the deep sea, strength and size are not the only measures of power. In fact, the animals with the greatest influence are often the ones we barely notice. Lanternfish are not predators at the very top of the food chain, nor are they massive enough to alter the physical environment. Instead, their power comes from their numbers, from their reliability, from the way they knit the ecosystem together. They don't roar like lions or tower like elephants. Their authority is quiet, invisible, and yet undeniable. Consider how many other creatures rely on them. Squid, tuna, salmon, penguins, seals, whales. Many of the ocean's most iconic animals depend directly on lanternfish as food. Remove the lanternfish, and you pull a thread that unravels an enormous part of the marine web. Predators that feed on them would weaken. Species that depend on those predators would shift. The entire balance of the ocean would lurch out of alignment. That is not a fragile role. That is structural dominance. You don't need to control through aggression when the ecosystem leans on you so heavily. In their silence, lanternfish exert the kind of rule that most kings and queens could only dream of. The irony is that such a ruler is nearly invisible to us. If you were to hold a lanternfish in your hand, you might dismiss it as unremarkable. Small, silvery, with a scattering of light-producing organs along its body. No larger than your palm. Nothing about it screams power. And yet, multiply that tiny body by billions, and you begin to see the outline of a hidden empire. Each night they rise in waves so vast that sonar once mistook them for the ocean floor. Each day, they sink back down into the dark, carrying nutrients with them. This back and forth motion is like the lungs of the sea, drawing in energy and releasing it through the depths. You cannot watch that happen without recognizing influence. But power in the deep is not only about food chains. Lanternfish play a role in the planet's climate as well. By eating near the surface and then diving deep, they transport carbon into the abyss, locking it away for centuries. Without them, more carbon would remain near the surface, dissolving into the atmosphere, accelerating warming. With them, that carbon sinks into the unseen vaults of the deep sea. In that sense, lanternfish are climate regulators as much as they are prey. They help set the balance of gases in the air we breathe. It is astonishing to think that creatures so obscure might quietly influence the future of every forest, every city, every human alive today. They do not know it, of course. They are not aware of their role in the carbon cycle. But that doesn't make the effect any less real. Power does not require intention. It only requires influence. So when we ask who really rules the deep, we might expect to hear of giant squid, of sperm whales, of predators with teeth and tentacles. But those are not the rulers. They are hunters, powerful but dependent. Their survival hangs on the steady presence of lanternfish. The true rulers are the ones without which the others cannot exist. And that shifts the spotlight firmly onto these small glowing fish. They rule not by fear, not by dominance, but by necessity. Every night they rise, every day they fall, and in doing so they hold the abyss together. There is a strange beauty in that kind of rulership. It suggests that the most important figures in a system may not be the loudest, the fiercest, or the most visible. Instead, they may be the ones who work quietly, consistently, unseen. That is as true in the ocean as it is in our own lives. We often look to leaders, celebrities, or powerful figures as the ones shaping the world, but just as often, it is the unnoticed many, the workers, the quiet contributors, the dependable participants who keep the system from collapsing. The lanternfish is a reminder of that truth, flickering away in the dark when nobody is watching, and yet ensuring that everything else continues as it should. And still, their mystery deepens. For all we know about their abundance and their migrations, there is much we do not understand. How do they navigate those enormous nightly journeys? How do they coordinate without central direction? How do they survive pressures that would crush most creatures? And perhaps most intriguingly, why have they remained so hidden from our awareness? They rule the abyss, but they do so anonymously. That anonymity may be their greatest survival strategy of all. After all, predators cannot hunt what they cannot see, and humans cannot exploit what they do not notice. Their invisibility is part of their power. Even the light they produce adds to that camouflage. The glowing organs along their bodies, called photophores, are arranged in patterns that help them blend into the faint light from above. This trick, known as counter-illumination, allows them to disappear against the dim glow filtering from the surface. To a predator looking upward, the lanternfish is not a silhouette but a shimmer, indistinguishable from the light of the water itself. Imagine the irony of a fish that glows not to be seen, but to remain unseen. Even their lanterns are tools of secrecy. It is in this way that lanternfish illustrate a paradox of the deep. The rulers are invisible, the lights are disguises, the abundance is hidden. Their kingdom is not one of display, but of concealment. And yet, when sonar pulses strike the scattering layer, or when nets accidentally sweep through the twilight zone, the truth emerges. Billions upon billions of tiny bodies, moving like clockwork, running the most immense migration on the planet. You cannot look at that and deny their influence. The deep bows to their rhythm, and the rest of the ocean follows. Asking who rules the deep is not the same as asking who we notice. If it were, the answer would be whales or sharks. But the real rulers are the ones whose absence would collapse the system. Strip away lanternfish, and the abyss would starve. Predators would thin. Nutrient cycles would break. The climate itself would shift. That is rulership, quiet and absolute. And so, in the question of the dark, we find a surprising answer. The abyss is ruled not by the terrifying monsters of old sailors' tales, nor by the giants we celebrate in documentaries, but by billions of tiny, glowing fish that most of us never hear about. They hold the deep together, unseen and unnamed, rulers of a realm we barely understand. And as we drift further into their story, the question will continue to echo, reminding us that true power often lives where we least expect it. If you were to dive into the ocean and keep going down, there would come a point where the world changes in ways most people never imagine. At first, the surface still feels familiar. Sunlight filters through, painting the water in shifting blue and green. Fish move in schools that shimmer like coins tossed in the air, and coral reefs stretch out like bustling cities. But keep descending, and the colours start to fade. Reds vanish first, then oranges, then yellows, until all that remains is blue, and then even that begins to dim, Shapes blur, shadows stretch, the surface world disappears. At somewhere between 200 and 1,000 meters down, you enter what scientists call the mesopelagic, but what most simply refer to as the twilight zone. The name fits. This is the band of water that sits between day and night, between light and darkness, between the familiar and the unknown. It is not bright enough for photosynthesis, yet not entirely without light. Sunlight still trickles down faintly, just enough for your eyes to notice a kind of ghostly glow, but never enough to see clearly. If you were there without artificial light, you would find yourself in a dim world where outlines flicker but details remain hidden, where it always feels like dusk no matter what time it is above. It is in this strange realm that lanternfish thrive. In fact, they are the dominant inhabitants, shaping much of what happens in these depths. The Twilight Zone is sometimes called the ocean's middle kingdom, neither surface nor abyss, a corridor through which countless creatures travel. Every evening, lanternfish rise from deeper layers to feed in waters closer to the surface, and every morning they return, sinking back into the dark. Their daily commute cuts straight through this band of dimness. If you could pause the ocean and look inside, you would see them scattered like stars across a midnight sky, drifting and darting, each with its own faint glow. But to picture this correctly, you must remember scale. The Twilight Zone is not a thin ribbon. It stretches hundreds of meters thick across the entire planet. Imagine a belt of dim light encircling the globe, filled with animals you've never seen, moving in patterns that rival migrations on land but are almost entirely invisible to us. Billions of fish, shrimp, jelly-like creatures, squid, and more live here, many of them relying on bioluminescence to survive. In the near darkness, glowing is not a rarity, it is the rule. Estimates suggest that as many as 9 out of 10 animals in the Twilight Zone can produce their own light in some form. This is the world of lanternfish, a world where darkness is never complete and light is never steady. For humans, this layer is more than just mysterious. It is also almost unreachable. The pressure is immense, up to 100 times greater than at the surface, enough to crush most submarines unless they are specially built. The temperature hovers near freezing. Visibility is low. And yet, despite all of that, this zone may hold more biomass than the entire rest of the ocean combined. It is the hidden storehouse of life on Earth, a place where energy from the sunlit shallows is intercepted, processed, and redistributed downward. And lanternfish are at the centre of it. When early sonar surveys detected the deep scattering layer, it was in this very region that the signals bounce back most strongly. The Twilight Zone is where lanternfish gather in densities so thick that the sea itself seems to echo. For decades, submariners thought they were picking up the bottom of the ocean, only to realise that what they were seeing was not rock or sediment, but living bodies moving as one. That discovery changed our picture of the ocean forever. Suddenly the Twilight Zone was no longer empty. It was crowded, dynamic, alive. Still, there is something profoundly strange about this place. It sits between the visible world above and the unknown abyss below, but it does not belong fully to either. It is a place of transition, where creatures from the deep rise and mingle with those from shallower waters. It is also a place of concealment, where animals use darkness and light together to hide. Lanternfish are experts at this. They position themselves so that their glowing organs cancel out the faint glow from the surface, making them nearly invisible from below. Other creatures do the same, evolving ways to remain hidden in a place where there is just enough light to betray you and just enough dark to lose you. Predators lurk, prey scatter, and everything balances in a delicate standoff. To live here requires adaptation. Lanternfish have large eyes to catch the faintest glimmers, sensitive to wavelengths that our eyes cannot see. Their bodies are slender and built for quick movement, allowing them to dart away from threats. Their migration schedule is timed to the cycle of day and night, ensuring they feed in darkness and hide in dimness. And their bioluminescence is tuned not for brightness, but for subtlety, for matching the environment so perfectly that they vanish. They are creatures designed for in-between spaces, thriving where neither light nor shadow is complete. But beyond their biology, their presence here tells us something larger. The Twilight Zone is not just a corridor for lanternfish, it is a crossroads for the planet. Carbon from the surface drifts down as marine snow, tiny particles of dead plankton, fecal matter and organic debris, and much of it is intercepted by animals here. Lanternfish eat it, package it, and carry it downward when they return to deeper layers at dawn. This process, called the biological pump, is one of the most important regulators of Earth's climate. Without it, carbon would remain in the surface waters, eventually leaking back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. With it, that carbon is buried deep in the sea, stored away for centuries. In a very real way, the Twilight Zone acts as Earth's hidden filter, and lanternfish are among its most effective agents. It's remarkable to realise that when we speak of climate, of the balance of gases in the air, of the rising temperatures on land, we are indirectly speaking about what happens here, in this dim band of ocean far below the waves. The Twilight Zone, unseen and mostly unknown, helps set the pace of the entire planet's atmosphere. And yet, we rarely hear its name. We talk about rainforests, about polar ice, about desert winds, but not about the endless half-light where lanternfish swim. The truth is that the fate of the air we breathe depends as much on this hidden realm as on anything we see above the surface. The Twilight Zone also holds mysteries we have barely begun to unravel. Many of the animals here are still undescribed by science. Entire species remain nameless, drifting in the dark. Their behaviours are poorly understood, their lifespans unknown, their interactions invisible. What little we do know often comes from nets that damage the delicate bodies of these creatures, leaving us with fragments instead of wholes. Observing them directly is almost impossible. The pressure destroys most equipment. The cold fogs lenses. The darkness swallows artificial light. And so, even now, most of what happens in the Twilight Zone remains unseen. For lanternfish, though, it is home. It is their kingdom, their stage, the place where their nightly journeys begin and end. In a sense, they are the Twilight Zone embodied, neither surface nor abyss, but something in between, something essential yet overlooked. They remind us that the most important parts of the world are not always the most visible. This dim band of water stretching across the globe is one of the great engines of life on Earth, and lanternfish are the gears that keep it turning. If you pause for a moment and imagine it, you can almost see it. A world suspended between light and shadow, filled with drifting bodies, each carrying its own faint glow. Some rise, some fall, some hover. The water is thick with tiny particles, food for some, camouflage for others. Predators circle silently. Prey scatter suddenly. It is a world of constant tension, but also of balance. And within that balance, lanternfish move in numbers so great that the ocean itself seems to pulse with their rhythm. That rhythm, the steady rise and fall of lanternfish through the Twilight Zone, is what keeps the abyss alive, what feeds the surface, and what binds the ocean together. It is not dramatic, not violent, but it is powerful, and it happens every single day, without pause, whether we notice it or not. The Twilight Zone, this realm between light and shadow, belongs to them more than to anything else, and as long as they continue their journeys, the rest of the ocean will follow. When humans first began to learn what lived beneath the waves, their discoveries were almost always shaped by limitation. For centuries we only knew the ocean by what washed ashore, what was pulled up in nets, or what floated at the surface. The deeper world remained invisible, and so it became a canvas for imagination. Sailors told tales of leviathans that could swallow ships, glowing monsters that followed them at night, and creatures so strange they defied description. The deeper the water, the stranger the stories. For a long time, lanternfish lived in that same hidden category, not because they were rare, but because no one had the means to see them where they lived. The first real glimpses of lanternfish came not from careful planning, but from accident. Nets lowered to catch other species would sometimes return with small, silvery fish studded with tiny glowing spots. At first, these odd catches were overlooked, dismissed as unimportant compared to larger, more familiar fish. Who would bother paying attention to something only a few centimetres long, mixed in with masses of other creatures? But gradually, scientists began to notice a pattern. These little glowing fish weren't occasional strays. They kept appearing again and again, in huge numbers from every part of the ocean where the nets were dropped. The more researchers looked, the clearer it became that these creatures were not marginal, they were central. In the 19th century, oceanography was still in its infancy. Expeditions like the famous voyage of the HMS Challenger in the 1870s set out to study the deep sea with more rigour than ever before. The Challenger dredged the ocean floor, measured depths, collected samples, and brought back a wealth of new knowledge. Among its finds were specimens of lanternfish, carefully preserved and sent back to museums where naturalists examined them with curiosity. The fish were small, yes, but their light-producing organs were unmistakable. For the first time, there was evidence that glowing animals were not rare exceptions, but part of an entire category of life adapted to the deep. Imagine being a scientist at that time, holding in your hand a fish that seemed to carry its own lantern. Electricity was only just beginning to spread on land, and here was a creature from the ocean already wired with natural light. The excitement was palpable. To many it seemed like proof that the deep sea, far from being lifeless, was full of adaptations stranger than anything found on land. Still, even with those first discoveries, lanternfish remained mostly overlooked. Their abundance was not yet understood, and without the means to see them in their natural environment, they stayed hidden in the margins of reports. It wasn't until the 20th century, when sonar technology emerged, that humans began to grasp just how many lanternfish there were. Sonar, developed for naval purposes during World War II, worked by sending sound waves into the water and measuring the echoes that returned. To the surprise of operators, there was often a strong signal bouncing back from deep layers, hundreds of meters below the surface. At first, many assumed they were detecting the seafloor. But then came the puzzle. The seafloor seemed to rise at night and sink again during the day. The depth changed by hundreds of meters in just a few hours. The ocean floor doesn't move, so what could this shifting layer be? The answer eventually was life. The sonar was bouncing off countless small creatures rising and falling in daily migration. Among them, dominating the biomass, were lanternfish. That revelation was staggering. What had once seemed like empty water was actually filled with more living matter than almost anywhere else on Earth. Lanternfish were no longer just oddities caught by chance. They were revealed as one of the most abundant vertebrates on the planet. For the first time, humans glimpsed the scale of their hidden empire. But even then, our view was partial. We could detect their movements, measure their density in some areas, and study dead specimens brought up by nets, but we still lacked the ability to see them alive in their world. The twilight zone remained largely invisible, its inhabitants distorted by the violence of capture. Lanternfish, pulled to the surface, often arrived damaged, their delicate bodies unable to withstand the change in pressure. Their bioluminescence faded quickly, leaving scientists to imagine what they must have looked like alive, glowing in the dark waters. Only with the advent of deep-diving submersibles and remotely operated vehicles did humans begin to truly witness lanternfish in their element. Cameras sent into the twilight zone revealed the faint sparks of their light, scattered across the dark water like stars. Scientists watched as they drifted, darted, and gathered in schools so large they seemed to fill the ocean itself. The first time researchers saw these vast clouds of lanternfish alive, moving together in the dim light, it was like looking into a galaxy. The scale was almost incomprehensible. These glimpses reshaped our understanding of the ocean. No longer was the deep sea a barren desert dotted with the occasional odd creature. Instead, it was a realm teeming with life, dominated by animals so small and so numerous that they had gone unnoticed for centuries. Lanternfish were no longer background figures in ocean ecology. They were central characters. And yet, even as we gained those glimpses, much remained mysterious. Scientists could measure their abundance, but their exact behaviours remained elusive. How did they navigate? How did they communicate? How did they decide when to rise and when to sink? The truth is, we still don't fully know. Our glimpses, while transformative, are still only fragments. To this day, lanternfish remain both discovered and undiscovered, known and unknown, as if the ocean still insists on keeping some of its secrets. For most people, those first scientific glimpses never made the headlines. Lanternfish didn't capture the imagination of the public the way whales or giant squid did. They were too small, too understated, too hidden. And so, while science acknowledged their importance, the wider world went on mostly unaware. That disconnect still exists today. You can ask almost anyone to name an ocean animal, and they'll say shark, dolphin, octopus. Rarely will anyone say lanternfish, and yet by every measure of abundance and influence, lanternfish might be the most important of them all. That irony, that mismatch between importance and recognition, is what makes their story so compelling. When humans first glimpsed them, they barely noticed. Even now, when we know more, they remain absent from our imagination. But the ocean does not care about our imagination. It runs on reality, and in reality, lanternfish shape it in profound ways. Our glimpses, incomplete as they are, have at least shown us enough to understand that. We have seen just enough to realise that we are looking at rulers of the deep who choose to remain unseen. And so, the first glimpses of lanternfish are not just a chapter in scientific discovery. They are also a reminder of how easily the most important things can be overlooked, how much of the world lies just beyond our sight, and how often the true foundations of life are hidden in plain darkness. The story of lanternfish is the story of revelation delayed, recognition resisted, and importance finally acknowledged. And even now, as we peer deeper with better tools, we're still only catching glimpses, still learning that the abyss holds far more than we ever thought possible. When we think about rulers, we usually picture power measured in size, strength, or the ability to dominate with force. On land, elephants tower over the savannah, lions announce themselves with roars that travel for miles, and bears command respect through sheer bulk. In the ocean, whales stretch longer than buses, sharks inspire both awe and fear, and squids grow tentacles that could wrap around cars. These are the animals we imagine when we talk about kings and queens of the natural world. But lanternfish remind us that power can also be measured in another way entirely. It can come not from size, but from numbers so overwhelming that everything else bends around them. The lanternfish, small and unassuming, are barely the length of your hand. If you held one, it would seem delicate, almost fragile. But what makes them extraordinary is not the individual, it is the collective. There are more lanternfish than almost any other type of vertebrate on Earth. Some estimates suggest they may make up as much as 65% of all fish biomass in the ocean. That's not 65% of deep-sea fish, but of all fish everywhere. If you were to weigh all the cod, tuna, salmon, anchovies, and every other familiar fish in the sea, lanternfish would outweigh them many times over. This is what makes them rulers. They don't dominate with tooth or claw. They dominate by sheer presence, by filling the sea in such numbers that their influence becomes unavoidable. Every predator in the twilight zone learns to hunt them. Every migration of larger animals depends on their reliability. Entire ecosystems shift around the availability of lanternfish. They are the foundation on which countless other lives rest. That is not a flashy kind of rulership, but it is absolute. To understand the scale, you have to imagine the ocean not as empty space, but as a vast, three-dimensional forest. In a forest, trees are everywhere, and smaller animals live among them in ways that seem endless. In the ocean, lanternfish play the role of the trees and the smaller animals combined. They are the ever-present backdrop, the scaffolding of the system, the biomass that everything else leans on. They are everywhere in the twilight zone, scattered across the globe in densities so high that sonar readings mistake them for the sea floor. In many parts of the ocean, you could drop a net at random and come up with lanternfish. They are not occasional, they are constant. What makes this even more impressive is the range they cover. Lanternfish are found in every ocean, from the tropics to the poles. They are not bound to one region or one type of environment. They have adapted to almost every marine condition, thriving in waters shallow enough to reach sunlight and deep enough to brush against the edge of the abyss. In the Antarctic, they swim beneath the ice. In the Pacific, they drift across vast basins. In the Atlantic, they fill the twilight zone like clouds. No matter where you look, lanternfish are there. Their kingdom is not local, it is planetary. This abundance means they serve as prey for an extraordinary list of animals. Squid chase them, penguins dive for them, whales gulp them by the mouthful, tuna and salmon depend on them as an energy source. Seabirds pluck them from the surface when they rise at night. Even humans, though indirectly, benefit from their presence, because many of the fish we eat are sustained by lanternfish as prey. Remove them from the system, and the collapse would ripple upward through every layer of the food web. That is why their dominance matters. They don't control by choice, but by necessity. Everything else leans on their abundance. It's worth pausing to think about how unusual this is. On land, the animals that dominate in numbers are usually small, like insects, rodents, or birds. They're abundant, but they don't carry the entire ecosystem in quite the same way. In the ocean, lanternfish are unique in how much weight their numbers carry. Their sheer biomass shapes predator populations, nutrient cycling, and even climate. Imagine if ants not only filled every forest and grassland, but also regulated the planet's air and temperature. That's the scale we're talking about when it comes to lanternfish. Their dominance also shows in the daily migrations they undertake. Billions rise to the surface each night to feed, then sink again at dawn. This isn't just a quirk of behaviour, it's an engine of energy transfer. They eat plankton near the surface, then carry that energy down into deeper waters where other creatures feed on them. In doing so, they connect the surface and the abyss in a way few animals can. Without their nightly commute, the deep ocean would starve. With it, nutrients and carbon are transported into the depths, feeding ecosystems that would otherwise have nothing to sustain them. This is why scientists sometimes call lanternfish the great connectors. They bridge layers of the ocean that would otherwise remain isolated. Of course, all this abundance also brings danger. Being small and numerous makes them a target for predators. Lanternfish have adapted to this with remarkable strategies. Their bodies are covered with photophores, tiny light-producing organs, arranged in patterns that help them hide. By glowing faintly on their undersides, they cancel out the dim light from above, erasing their silhouettes and making them almost invisible. This trick, called counter-illumination, is one of the most widespread survival tools in the Twilight Zone, and lanternfish are masters of it. In addition, their migrations help them avoid predators that rely on sight. By feeding at night and hiding in the deep during the day, they minimize the risk of being hunted. These strategies, combined with sheer numbers, ensure their survival despite the constant pressure of predation. But survival is not the same as obscurity. While predators know them well, humans have only recently begun to appreciate their significance. For decades, they were dismissed as background noise in the ocean, unimportant compared to larger, more visible fish. Only when sonar revealed the scale of their movements did we begin to understand just how vast their kingdom really is. Today, marine scientists recognize lanternfish as one of the most important groups of animals in the sea. And yet, outside of scientific circles, their name is still barely known. They are rulers without recognition. presiding over a kingdom that most people don't even realize exists. There is a lesson in that. True influence does not always demand visibility. Sometimes it thrives in anonymity, in the quiet background, shaping everything without ever needing to be acknowledged. Lanternfish embody that truth. They rule not through dominance, not through spectacle, but through persistence and presence. They are everywhere, always, and that's enough to give them a kind of power no predator can match. And the more we study them, the more their importance grows. In recent years, researchers have discovered just how crucial lanternfish are to the ocean's carbon cycle. By feeding near the surface and then sinking during the day, they transport vast amounts of carbon into the deep. Some studies suggest they may sequester more carbon than all the world's forests combined. If that's true, then their role extends far beyond the ocean. They are not just rulers of the deep, they are regulators of the planet. Their abundance has global consequences, shaping the air we breathe, the climate we live in, the future we face. Imagine that for a moment. Tiny fish, no larger than your hand, existing in numbers so vast that they outweigh nearly every other vertebrate on Earth, silently moving carbon, feeding predators, connecting ecosystems. They do this without notice, without fanfare, without recognition. If there is such a thing as an invisible empire, lanternfish are its citizens, its builders, its rulers. Their kingdom is vast, their influence unmatched, and their presence undeniable. It's humbling to realise that when we look out at the ocean, what we see on the surface is only the faintest hint of what truly matters. The real rulers are not the ones we admire in documentaries or fear in stories. They are the countless small bodies drifting in the dark, flickering faintly, rising and falling with the rhythm of the sea. Lanternfish, tiny rulers of a vast kingdom, remind us that the foundations of life are often hidden, and that the greatest power may lie not in the spectacular few, but in the unnumbered many. Every evening, just as the last rays of sunlight sink beyond the horizon, something extraordinary begins to happen beneath the surface of the ocean. At first it is invisible to us, hidden in the darkening waters, but if you could peel back the layers and watch with clear eyes, you would see one of the greatest movements of life anywhere on Earth. Billions of small creatures begin to rise. Some are shrimp-like crustaceans, some are jelly-like drifters, and many are lanternfish, all pushing upward from the twilight zone into shallower waters. It's not a trickle, not a scatter, but a tide. An entire layer of the ocean comes alive and begins to climb, as if the sea itself were inhaling. By the time night has fully fallen, the surface is crowded with life that, only hours earlier, was hidden hundreds of meters down. This daily event has been called the greatest migration on the planet. It does not stretch across continents like the wildebeest of Africa, or span hemispheres like flocks of birds. Instead, it moves vertically, up and down through the water column. Each night, creatures rise toward the surface to feed under the cover of darkness. Each morning, as dawn returns, they sink back into the deep. The cycle repeats every single day across every ocean on Earth, and at the heart of it, making up a huge portion of the biomass involved, are lanternfish. The scale is staggering. If you could gather all the lanternfish making this journey in a single region of the sea, the mass would dwarf anything we see on land. Imagine a river not of water but of living bodies, flowing upward at night and downward at dawn, pulsing like the breath of the ocean itself. This is no small phenomenon. It is an engine of the biosphere, a conveyor belt of energy that links the surface with the depths. But why do they move at all? The reason lies in the tension between opportunity and danger. The surface waters are rich in plankton, tiny drifting organisms that thrive in the sunlight. For lanternfish, plankton is food, and the surface at night is a buffet, but daylight makes those same waters dangerous. Predators with sharp eyes can see lanternfish against the light. Staying near the surface when the sun is up would be a death sentence, so the lanternfish compromise. They feed at night when the cover of darkness makes them harder to spot, and they retreat at dawn to the relative safety of the twilight zone, where dimness and bioluminescence help them stay hidden. This daily commute is not optional, it is survival. The journey is not easy. Rising from depths of 300, 500, sometimes 1,000 meters means passing through layers of pressure and temperature. It is a climb through gradients of environment, where each meter feels different from the last. And yet, lanternfish do it with precision, night after night. Their internal clocks are tuned to the cycle of light, guiding them upward as shadows lengthen and downward as the first hint of morning begins. They do not hesitate. The migration is as regular as the tides, as consistent as the rotation of the earth. It is hard to overstate what this means for the ocean. By moving upward, lanternfish consume vast quantities of plankton, regulating surface populations. By moving downward, they carry that energy into deeper waters, where predators await. Along the way, they release waste and eventually die, sinking with carbon that is buried in the abyss. In this way, the vertical migration is not just about feeding. It is about cycling nutrients, redistributing energy, and balancing ecosystems across layers of the sea that would otherwise remain disconnected. Without it, the surface would be overcrowded, and the deep would be barren. With it, the ocean functions as a unified system. When scientists first discovered this migration, it was by accident. As sonar became widely used in the mid-20th century, operators noticed a strange phenomenon. Their instruments consistently picked up what looked like the seafloor, but it wasn't fixed. It shifted upward at night and sank again during the day. At first they thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the system. But repeated measurements revealed the truth. The sonar was bouncing off billions of small creatures rising and falling in unison. It was a living seafloor, a scattering layer of animals so dense that it confused the instruments. For a while, submariners referred to it as a false bottom. Eventually, scientists realized they had stumbled onto the greatest migration on Earth. Lanternfish, as one of the dominant species in that layer, became central to the story. They were not just participants, but leaders, setting the pace and scale of the movement. Their role became even clearer when researchers measured the carbon flux associated with their migrations. The numbers were almost unbelievable. The biomass moving upward and downward each day is so immense that it rivals the total weight of all the large animals on land. It is like a hidden heartbeat, pulsing through the ocean day after day, never stopping, never slowing, always in rhythm with the sun and moon. Think for a moment about the implications. Every night, billions of lanternfish rise within a few hours. That means countless predators adjust their behavior to intercept them. Squid hover, waiting for the ascent. Tuna swim toward the surface, timing their hunts. Penguins dive in, synchronized with the upward tide. Whales open their mouths wide, filtering huge volumes of water. All of these species depend on the predictability of the lanternfish migration. Their survival is tied to it as tightly as seasons are tied to land animals. The migration is not just a movement, it is a foundation. For humans, it remains almost invisible. We cannot see it from the surface. We cannot hear it from the shore, and most of us have no idea it happens at all. And yet, the air we breathe, the climate we depend on, and the fish we eat are all shaped by this event. It happens whether we notice or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we believe it or not. The vertical migration is one of the great hidden forces of the planet, and at its centre, lanternfish rise and fall like clockwork, anonymous rulers of a system that sustains us all. One of the most remarkable aspects of this migration is its universality. It happens in every ocean, from the equator to the poles. It does not depend on season or geography. Wherever there is ocean, lanternfish are there, rising and falling with the cycle of day and night. That global reach makes the migration one of the most consistent natural events on Earth, a kind of planetary rhythm that ties together the surface and the abyss. It is as reliable as sunrise, as constant as the rotation of the planet, and yet it remains largely unknown to the people who depend on it most. To imagine it, picture a vast plain filled with wildebeest, stretching as far as the eye can see. Now imagine that plain is not horizontal but vertical, stretching from the deep to the surface. Imagine the animals rising together at dusk, grazing under the cover of night, and then descending again at dawn, retreating into the shadows. That is what the lanternfish migration looks like, except the numbers are larger than any land migration could ever hope to match. It is the wildebeest migration multiplied by orders of magnitude, played out every night across the entire planet. Scientists are still working to understand all the details. How do lanternfish know when to begin their ascent? How do they navigate through the water column? What triggers their descent at dawn? How do they avoid exhausting themselves with such constant travel? Some answers point to internal biological clocks tuned to light. Others suggest that chemical signals or predator pressure may influence timing. But the full picture is still incomplete. Even with advanced instruments and deep-diving submersibles, much of the migration remains invisible. We know it happens. We measure its effects. But the intimate details remain hidden, and perhaps that is fitting. The vertical migration is not a show put on for us. It is a survival strategy, evolved over millions of years, perfected by necessity. Lanternfish do not rise to impress us. They rise to feed, to live, to continue. Their migrations are ancient rhythms, older than human history, older than civilization, older even than the species we most admire in the sea. Each night they repeat the pattern, unaware that their actions shape the entire biosphere. There is a kind of humility in recognizing this. We spend so much time focused on the visible, the spectacular, the dramatic, but the true foundations of life are often hidden, quiet, and unnoticed. Lanternfish remind us of that with every rise and fall. Their migration is the largest on Earth, and yet almost no one outside of science knows it exists. That is the paradox of the deep. The greatest movements are invisible, the greatest rulers are unknown, and the greatest stories are still waiting to be told. And so, as you sit here listening, the migration is happening right now. Somewhere in the ocean, billions of lanternfish are rising, following the dim light of the moon, spreading out near the surface to feed. Squid are gathering to hunt them. Whales are positioning themselves for a feast. Penguins are diving in icy waters, chasing them through the night. And when dawn approaches, all of them will sink again into the twilight zone, leaving the surface empty, resetting the cycle for another day. It happens without pause, without delay, without recognition. The greatest migration on Earth, carried out by billions of small glowing fish, unseen and unnamed, yet essential to the life of the planet. The ocean, as vast and unknowable as it seems, runs on exchanges. It is a system of trade and transfer, of energy passed from one creature to the next, in a cycle that never pauses. Every bite taken, every movement made, every death in the water becomes part of an economy older than our species. On land, we often picture balance in terms of forests, fields, or herds. In the sea, the balance is harder to see because it happens in darkness, spread across unimaginable distances. And yet, there are key players in this economy, creatures whose role is so essential that without them, the system would collapse. Lanternfish are among the most important of these. They are not kings in the way whales dominate the surface or sharks command attention, but they are the currency on which countless others rely. To grasp this, it helps to think about what food really means in the ocean. Sunlight powers the smallest organisms at the surface. Phytoplankton, microscopic plants that bloom in enormous numbers, capturing energy from the sun and turning it into living matter. Tiny zooplankton feed on them, drifting in the currents like dust motes in a beam of light. But the energy doesn't stop there. It must be moved up the chain from the smallest to the larger, and then to the predators we recognize. This transfer is never smooth. Much of the energy is lost along the way. But lanternfish serve as one of the most efficient bridges in that chain. They eat the small plankton and in turn are eaten by larger predators. Without them, that flow would be broken. In economic terms, lanternfish are like coins in constant circulation. Individually, each one is small, but together they hold enormous value. Predators treat them as dependable currency, an exchange they can count on day after day, year after year. Whales, tuna, squid, penguins, seals, seabirds, all of them rely on the steady availability of lanternfish. Remove that currency from the system, and the trade stalls. Energy stops moving. Entire populations falter. Lanternfish may not set the terms of the economy, but they are the resource that makes it run. This role becomes even clearer when you look at scale. The combined biomass of lanternfish is thought to be in the billions of tons. That number is almost too large to picture. It means that if you gathered all the lanternfish in the ocean, their weight would surpass that of every cow, pig, chicken and human combined. Imagine the entire human economy, food, transport, commerce, suddenly vanishing, and you have some idea of what would happen to the ocean if lanternfish disappeared. The sea's economy is structured around their presence, just as ours is structured around the goods and resources we trade every day. One of the most fascinating aspects of this hidden economy is how far it extends beyond the ocean itself. Lanternfish are not only food for predators, they are also vehicles for transporting nutrients. When they rise to the surface at night and eat plankton, they are gathering energy produced by sunlight. When they sink back into the twilight zone, they take that energy with them. Some of it is digested and excreted, releasing nutrients in deeper layers where other creatures feed. Some of it is locked into their bodies, eventually sinking to the seafloor when they die. This downward movement of energy is one of the key mechanisms by which the ocean regulates the planet's carbon cycle. In effect, lanternfish are moving energy and matter through the system, like traders moving goods along ancient routes. This process, often called the biological pump, is one of Earth's most critical natural systems. Without it, carbon would remain near the surface, constantly cycling back into the atmosphere, warming the planet. With it, carbon is drawn downward, buried in the deep sea where it may remain for centuries. Lanternfish, by sheer numbers, are some of the most important drivers of this pump. They may not know it, but in their nightly commutes they are shaping the climate of the entire world. That makes them part of not just the ocean's economy, but the planet's. And yet their importance is still barely acknowledged in human terms. When people talk about fisheries, conservation, or climate change, lanternfish are rarely mentioned. They remain invisible in conversations that desperately need to include them. Part of the reason is that they live in places that are hard to study. Nets often destroy their delicate bodies, making it difficult to count them accurately. Sonar shows their movements, but not their details. Submersibles can only watch small patches at a time. For all our technology, the twilight zone resists easy measurement, and so the scale of lanternfish abundance remains partly hidden, even as we know enough to recognize their overwhelming significance. There are also challenges in translating that significance into human economics. Some have suggested harvesting lanternfish directly, turning them into food or fish meal for agriculture. On paper, the biomass seems limitless. In practice, the ecological cost could be catastrophic. Remove too many lanternfish, and you disrupt the flow of energy to predators that rely on them. Whales, tuna, and seabirds would suffer, with consequences rippling outward into ecosystems and human industries alike. The ocean's economy is not designed for extraction on that scale. It is designed for balance, for cycles that repeat endlessly without collapse. Lanternfish maintain that balance, but only if left to do so. This hidden economy is also a lesson in humility. We tend to think of ourselves as the centre of global systems, as though the planet revolves around our actions and industries. But the truth is that much of the balance we depend on comes from creatures we barely notice. Lanternfish are a prime example. They do not build cities, they do not plan, they do not strategize, and yet through their abundance and behaviour, they feed the ocean regulate the climate and sustain countless species. They are workers in a system far larger than themselves, unrecognized yet indispensable. If you could watch the ocean through the lens of this economy, you would see lanternfish everywhere. Each night they rise, consuming plankton that would otherwise accumulate unchecked. Each morning they sink, carrying energy and nutrients into depths that would otherwise be empty. Predators chase them, feeding on them in enormous numbers. Their bodies release carbon into the deep, storing it away, and the cycle repeats. This is not just survival for the fish. It is the economy of the sea, an endless trade that keeps the planet alive. Consider how many other systems depend on this. Penguins that feed their chicks rely on lanternfish caught during the nightly ascent. Whales that migrate across oceans depend on lanternfish-rich waters to sustain their massive bodies. Tuna that end up on dinner plates around the world are fueled indirectly by lanternfish they consumed along the way. Seabirds, seals, squid, all of them are shareholders in this hidden economy. Their survival is tied to the consistency of lanternfish migrations, the reliability of their numbers, the persistence of their role. This is what makes the idea of rulership in the abyss so intriguing. Power does not always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like contribution, like quiet persistence. Lanternfish may not chase or control, but they feed. They feed in numbers so immense that they shape the lives of everything else around them. In that sense, they are the great providers of the deep, the unseen economy that makes the rest of the ocean possible. Even now, as we talk about them, the exchange is happening. Somewhere in the Pacific, billions of lanternfish are rising, feeding on plankton, fueling predators. Somewhere in the Atlantic, their waste is sinking, releasing carbon into the twilight zone. Somewhere in the Southern Ocean, penguins are diving after them, carrying food back to their young. And somewhere in the Arctic, the same pattern repeats, unchanged, unstoppable, unacknowledged. The ocean's economy never closes. Lanternfish are always at work, and the more you think about it, the more astonishing it becomes. Our economies on land are fragile, vulnerable to disruption, requiring constant oversight and adjustment. The ocean's economy, built on lanternfish and other small creatures, has run smoothly for millions of years without collapse. It is only now, as humans begin to notice it, that it risks being disrupted. If we recognize the role of lanternfish, if we understand their place in the hidden balance, perhaps we can avoid repeating the mistakes we've made on land. Perhaps we can let this economy continue, unbroken, for the sake of the ocean and for ourselves. The truth is that lanternfish feed more than predators. They feed the planet. Their role in the transfer of energy and carbon, their sheer abundance, their consistency across every ocean, all of it makes them one of the most important animals alive today. And yet, they remain hidden, anonymous workers in the dark. Their economy is not measured in money but in survival, in the flow of life from one layer of the sea to another, in the balance of systems too large for us to see. That is their legacy. That is their power. And it is still unfolding night after night in silence, unseen but essential. If there is one feature that sets lanternfish apart, one trait that makes them instantly recognizable to the few people who have actually seen them alive in their world, it is their ability to glow. In the deep, where sunlight fades to nothing, light becomes rare, precious, and powerful. Most creatures in the twilight zone live in shadows so thick that vision is limited to fleeting shapes. But lanternfish carry their own light with them, scattered along their bodies in tiny organs called photophores. These faint sparks look almost like a constellation mapped across their skin, each point glowing softly in the darkness. For the lanternfish, this glow is not decoration. It is survival, communication, and sometimes deception. Bioluminescence, the ability of organisms to produce light through chemical reactions, is one of the most widespread adaptations in the ocean. On land, we see it only occasionally, in fireflies on summer nights, or certain fungi glowing faintly in the forest. But in the sea, especially in the twilight zone, it is everywhere. Estimates suggest that as many as 3/4 of deep-sea animals can generate light in some form. It is less an exception than a rule. For lanternfish, it is their defining feature, the reason for their name, the tool that allows them to thrive in a world that would otherwise swallow them whole. The light itself comes from photophores, specialized organs embedded in their skin. Inside each photophore, chemical reactions occur between molecules known as luciferins and enzymes called luciferases. When these reactions happen, energy is released in the form of photons, light. The process is remarkably efficient, producing almost no heat. Unlike the warm glow of a light bulb, bioluminescence is cold light, perfect for creatures that cannot afford to waste energy. For a lanternfish, every spark is a precise, purposeful flicker, tuned by millions of years of evolution. The arrangement of these photophores is not random. Each species of lanternfish has its own unique pattern, like a fingerprint written in light. Some have spots along their bellies, some along their sides, some near their tails. These patterns serve multiple purposes. One of the most important is counter-illumination, a clever trick that allows lanternfish to hide in plain sight. When faint light filters down from the surface, predators below look upward and see silhouettes. Lanternfish use their photophores to match that light, erasing their outlines and blending into the background. To a predator's eye, the fish vanish, their bodies disguised as nothing more than a shimmer in the water. But the photophores also serve as a form of communication. In the dim twilight, where vision is limited, glowing patterns may help lanternfish recognize members of their own species. They may signal during mating, helping individuals find one another in the endless dark. Some scientists even believe that subtle changes in the intensity or timing of the light could convey information, like signals passed between fireflies in the night. If that is true, then the twilight zone is alive not only with drifting bodies, but also with silent conversations in light, messages written in flickers too faint for us to read. The role of bioluminescence doesn't stop there. For lanternfish, the glow can also act as a lure, drawing plankton or smaller creatures closer, or as a decoy, distracting predators long enough for escape. In some species, light organs can be flashed suddenly, startling attackers. In others, the glow may misdirect a predator's strike, guiding it toward a tail instead of a head. Light becomes not just a shield, but a weapon, a way of bending the rules of survival in a place where shadows dominate. It is difficult for us to imagine what this looks like in practice. When we picture the deep, we often think of total darkness, an endless black void. But the twilight zone is not entirely black. It is alive with sparks. Every movement releases a flicker. Every encounter is illuminated by sudden flashes. Lanternfish drift like embers, schools of them glowing faintly, their light rising and falling with the rhythm of their migration. From a distance, the scene might look like a galaxy turned upside down, stars swimming instead of fixed in the sky. To the animals that live there, this galaxy of light is ordinary, the backdrop to daily survival. The power of light and darkness goes beyond biology. It shapes the entire ecosystem. Predators use it to hunt, prey use it to hide, mates use it to find one another. Entire food webs are structured around the ability to glow or to respond to glowing. Lanternfish are among the most successful examples of this adaptation, not because their light is bright, but because it is perfectly suited to their needs. They do not blind, they do not dazzle. They flicker just enough to disappear, just enough to connect, just enough to survive. What makes this even more remarkable is how uniform and yet varied the system is. Across the world's oceans, lanternfish use bioluminescence in broadly similar ways, but each population, each species has its own nuances. Some patterns are brighter, some dimmer. Some glow constantly, others in pulses. The diversity is immense, suggesting that bioluminescence is not a single solution, but a toolkit. with each species shaping it for its own survival. This versatility may be one of the reasons lanternfish are so abundant. Light is not just an adaptation, it is an entire strategy, flexible enough to meet countless challenges. Humans, for all our technology, still struggle to study these glowing patterns in detail. Most lanternfish lose their light when brought to the surface, their photophores fading once the delicate chemical balance is disrupted. Observing them in their natural habitat is difficult, requiring cameras that can withstand crushing pressure and operate in near total darkness without scaring the animals away. As a result, much of what we know comes from glimpses, from fragments of observation, from rare encounters with living specimens in controlled environments. There is still much to learn, and every new discovery reminds us how incomplete our understanding remains. The irony is that lanternfish, with their lights, are among the most visible creatures in the twilight zone, and yet they remain largely invisible to us. Their glow is too faint for human eyes from the surface, too scattered for satellites to detect. Only in the deep, face-to-face, do they reveal themselves, and even then, their light is subtle, designed more for concealment than display. They are lanterns that shine not for us, but for survival. Their biology is not a performance, but a necessity. Still, there is something deeply moving about imagining that world. Billions of small fish drifting together, each one carrying its own constellation, each one using light in ways we are only beginning to understand. The deep is not empty. It is alive with illumination, a silent symphony of sparks, and lanternfish, in their unnumbered millions, are its musicians, playing notes of light that shape the entire ecosystem. And while their bioluminescence is ancient, perfected through evolutionary time, it also hints at the future. Scientists studying these systems have begun to use lanternfish and other bioluminescent creatures as models for technology. Their light-producing reactions inspire medical imaging techniques, bio-inspired sensors, and even sustainable lighting ideas. What evolved in the dark seas millions of years ago may one day illuminate our hospitals, our cities, our research labs. The lanternfish's glow, faint and hidden, might yet change our world above the waves. But for now, in the abyss, it remains what it has always been. A tool for survival, a weapon against predators, a signal to mates, a cloak of invisibility. It is the light in the darkness, the quiet flicker that lets lanternfish rule their hidden realm without ever being seen. It is proof that in the deep sea, light is not a luxury, it is life itself. And so, even as we sit far above the waves, the biology of bioluminescence continues its silent work. Somewhere right now, countless lanternfish are glowing faintly in the twilight zone, their photophores firing, their silhouettes erased, their messages exchanged. Each flicker is a heartbeat of the deep, a sign that survival does not always come from size or strength, but from the perfect adaptation to a world of shadows. Lanternfish carry that adaptation in their skin, written in light, hidden in darkness, essential to the rhythm of the sea. In the deep sea, power is never absolute. Every creature is both hunter and hunted, predator and prey. Even the most abundant species, like lanternfish, live under constant pressure from those who would consume them. Their survival depends not only on numbers but on strategies, behaviours, and timing, and in turn countless predators rely on their presence, shaping their own lives around the movements of these small glowing fish. The balance of power in the twilight zone is not static. It is a shifting web of interactions, an endless cycle of pursuit and escape, feast and famine. Lanternfish sit in the middle of this cycle. They are not at the bottom, because they are too large to live only on microscopic plankton. They are not at the top, because they are too small to dominate through force. Instead, they occupy a central role, feeding on smaller organisms while serving as prey for larger ones. In many ways, they are the keystone of the Twilight Zone, the link that connects the energy of the surface to the demands of the deep. Remove them, and the chain above collapses. Keep them, and the system holds. Their prey is mostly plankton, tiny drifting organisms that bloom near the surface under sunlight. At night, when lanternfish rise, they gorge on these swarms. Copepods, krill, and other small crustaceans fill their diets, along with jelly-like organisms that drift with the currents. These meals provide the fuel they need for survival, for migration, and for reproduction, but feeding near the surface comes at a price. It exposes them to predators that hunt by sight, predators that have learned to anticipate the nightly ascent. Among these hunters are squid, swift and efficient, able to snatch lanternfish with long tentacles in the dark. Tuna and salmon, powerful swimmers from shallower waters, time their hunts to the migration, capitalizing on the dense gatherings near the surface. Penguins, particularly in the Southern Ocean, dive deep to chase lanternfish during the night, carrying their catch back to feed their chicks. Seals do the same, using sensitive whiskers to detect movements in the dark. Even seabirds join the hunt, plucking lanternfish from the surface when they venture too close. And of course whales, massive predators like sperm whales and baleen whales, consume lanternfish by the millions, their survival tied to the abundance of these small glowing fish. For lanternfish, the risk of being eaten is constant. Their defense lies not in strength, but in strategy. Their most important adaptation is their migration. By staying in the depths during the day, they avoid the predators that rely on vision to hunt. In the twilight zone, their photophores allow them to blend into the faint light, erasing their silhouettes from below. At night, they rise to feed in the cover of darkness, reducing the risk of being spotted. This daily rhythm minimizes danger, though it never eliminates it. Lanternfish are always vulnerable. Their survival depends on reducing the odds, not escaping entirely. Their second line of defense is their light. Counter-illumination helps them hide, but sudden flashes can also confuse predators. A quick burst of light may distract or disorient, giving the fish a split second to escape. Some species may use patterns of light as decoys, drawing attacks away from vital organs. In the endless arms race between predator and prey, light becomes a weapon as well as a shield. Lanternfish are not helpless. They are clever survivors, adapted perfectly to a world where the balance of power is never secure. What makes this balance remarkable is how stable it remains despite the constant pressure. Lanternfish are consumed in staggering numbers every day. Entire colonies of seabirds, pods of whales, schools of tuna, all feed on them relentlessly, and yet their populations remain vast. Their reproductive strategies help explain this. Lanternfish produce large numbers of eggs, ensuring that even with heavy predation, enough survive to maintain the population. Their dispersal across every ocean means that no single predator can wipe them out. Their sheer abundance ensures their persistence. Predators depend on them, but they never disappear. That balance is held for millions of years. This balance also highlights a deeper truth about power in the deep sea. It is not about domination, it is about interdependence. Lanternfish do not control the abyss by defeating their predators. They control it by feeding them, by sustaining them, by being so numerous and so consistent that the system revolves around their presence. The predators may seem more powerful, but without lanternfish, they would not exist in their current numbers. In that sense, the prey shapes the predator as much as the predator shapes the prey. From the perspective of the predators, lanternfish are more than just food. They are the cornerstone of survival. A whale may dive thousands of meters, but if the lanternfish migration did not rise reliably each night, those dives would be wasted. Penguins may time their breeding to coincide with lanternfish abundance. Tuna may follow their movements across oceans. The lives of these hunters are not independent. They are tied to the rhythm of lanternfish, as surely as the lanternfish themselves are tied to plankton blooms. The economy of the sea runs on this cycle, each layer depending on the one below. For humans, this web of interactions is more important than we often realise. Many of the fish we consume, tuna, salmon, cod, rely indirectly on lanternfish populations. Whales and seabirds that we admire and protect also depend on them. Even climate regulation, tied to the carbon cycle, relies on the constant feeding and sinking of lanternfish. In every way, the balance of hunters and hunted in the twilight zone ripples outward to shape our own world. We may not see it, but we are part of it. And yet this balance is fragile. Overfishing of predators can disrupt it, reducing the pressure on lanternfish and altering their role in the ecosystem. Climate change can shift plankton blooms, changing the timing and abundance of lanternfish migrations. Pollution can interfere with their delicate bodies, weakening populations. The deep may seem untouchable, but it is not immune to our influence. The balance of hunters and hunted, refined over millions of years, can be undone in decades if we're not careful. Still, there is resilience here too. Lanternfish have survived ice ages, warming periods, and shifting currents. They have endured predators larger and more terrifying than anything alive today. Their strategies, migration, bioluminescence, abundance, are not fragile inventions. They are ancient solutions, tested and refined by evolutionary time. That resilience gives hope, even as we recognise the challenges they face. If you imagine the Twilight Zone now, picture it not as empty water but as a theatre of constant pursuit. Lanternfish rise in the billions, feeding quietly on plankton. Above, predators wait, their movements precise, their timing perfect. Whales dive through schools, mouths open wide, squid dart and grab, penguins slice through the water with wings built for speed. Lanternfish scatter, flash, dive, vanish into the dim light. The dance continues through the night, predator and prey locked together, neither side ever truly winning, both sides dependent on the other. That is the balance of power in the deep. It is not a hierarchy but a cycle, a rhythm that sustains itself. Lanternfish are hunted relentlessly, but they never vanish. Predators consume them constantly, but they never exhaust a supply. The system remains steady, not through domination but through renewal, through abundance, through the endless repetition of survival. And as we think about this balance, we return again to the question of who really rules the deep. Is it the predators, fierce and powerful, consuming lanternfish by the millions? Or is it the lanternfish themselves, whose abundance makes those predators possible, whose survival strategies ensure their persistence, whose role in the system is irreplaceable? The answer, as always in nature, is not simple. The hunters and the hunted are bound together, each shaping the other, each defining the balance of the abyss. The rulers are not those who dominate, but those whose presence sustains. And in that sense, lanternfish remain at the centre, quietly powerful, endlessly hunted, and yet undeniably essential. In the deep sea, light is scarce. The further you descend, the more the world narrows into shades of blue and then fades into near-total blackness. By the time you reach the twilight zone, where lanternfish spend their lives, sunlight has weakened to a faint trace, a dim glow that barely filters down from the surface. It is not enough for photosynthesis, not enough to illuminate details, but just enough to cast shadows and silhouettes. In that half-light, vision becomes both crucial and incredibly difficult. And it is here that lanternfish reveal one of their most remarkable adaptations, eyes built to pierce the dark. At first glance, a lanternfish's eyes seem oversized compared to its body. A creature only a few centimeters long carries eyes that take up a large portion of its head. To us this might look strange, but to a lanternfish it is necessary. Bigger eyes mean a larger surface to gather what little light is available. In the twilight zone, every photon matters. The fish's eyes are like wide, sensitive windows tuned to capture the faintest glimmer, whether it comes from distant sunlight, scattered bioluminescence, or the silhouette of a predator passing above. The design goes deeper than size. Lanternfish eyes are specialised to detect the wavelengths of light that penetrate furthest into the ocean. Water absorbs most colours quickly. Reds vanish within a few metres. Oranges and yellows follow soon after. Only blue and green reach the depths where lanternfish live. Their eyes are packed with photoreceptor cells tuned specifically to those wavelengths, giving them heightened sensitivity where it matters most. They cannot see the vivid colours of a coral reef, but they do not need to. What they see is contrast, the faint outlines of prey, the dim shimmer of bioluminescence, the barely perceptible changes in light that signal dawn or dusk. Some species of lanternfish go even further. They possess adaptations that allow their eyes to see both upward and downward at once, detecting predators above and prey below. In certain cases, the eyes are slightly tubular, giving them a field of vision that stretches vertically instead of just sideways. This design is perfect for a life spent migrating up and down through the water column, where threats can come from any direction. To survive in the twilight zone is to be constantly alert, and lanternfish eyes are built for exactly that. The sensitivity of these eyes is hard for us to comprehend. Imagine walking into a cave with no light and being able to see the faint outline of a pebble on the floor, illuminated only by the glow of a single firefly on the ceiling. That is the kind of perception lanternfish carry with them. They can track movements invisible to us, respond to flashes of bioluminescence too subtle for our eyes, and time their migrations to shifts in light so faint they would escape even our best instruments. To live in the twilight zone is to live by fragments of illumination, and lanternfish are masters of it. Of course, such sensitivity comes with trade-offs. In brighter environments, their eyes would be overwhelmed, unable to adjust quickly to strong light, but lanternfish rarely experience brightness. Their world is dim by definition. They are not designed to see the coral reef or the sunlit shallows. They are designed to thrive where light is almost gone. In that world, their vision is not just adequate, it is extraordinary. This design also plays a role in their interactions with predators and prey. For example, plankton may emit small flashes of bioluminescence when disturbed. To us, these flashes would be barely noticeable. To lanternfish, they are bright signals marking the location of food. A whale or tuna might not notice the same flicker, but the lanternfish's sensitive eyes do. The same applies to predators. A shadow moving overhead, invisible to human divers, may register instantly to a lanternfish, triggering evasive maneuvers. Their eyes are tuned to survival, to the split-second recognition that means the difference between feeding and being fed upon. Scientists studying lanternfish vision have found remarkable complexity in the structure of their retinas. Some species even have multiple types of photoreceptors, suggesting they may be able to distinguish between different shades of blue or green. This could allow them to tell apart bioluminescent signals from different species, an important advantage in an environment where light is often the only form of communication. If true, then the twilight zone is not simply dark with occasional sparks. For lanternfish, it may be a rich landscape of subtle contrasts, where each flicker carries information invisible to us. Evolution's design is also evident in how these eyes are positioned. Forward-facing eyes give predators depth perception, the ability to judge distance for accurate strikes. Side-facing eyes give prey a wide field of view, better for spotting threats. Lanternfish sitting between predator and prey have eyes placed in a way that balances both needs. They can look forward enough to detect and pursue plankton, but also outward enough to scan for danger. Their vision is not perfect in either direction, but it is sufficient in both, reflecting their dual role in the food web. There is a certain elegance in this compromise. Lanternfish do not need eagle vision or the sharp focus of a cat. What they need is the ability to survive in a world of scarcity. Scarcity of light, scarcity of certainty, scarcity of time to react. Their eyes provide exactly that. Nothing more, nothing less. It is evolution at its most pragmatic, carving out just enough capability to ensure survival without wasting energy on extravagance. For us, studying these eyes has not been easy. Lanternfish are delicate, and their visual systems degrade quickly when removed from their environment. Much of what we know comes from dissected specimens, or brief observations in submersibles, and yet, even those limited glimpses reveal a design far beyond what we might expect from such a small fish. Their vision is a reminder that the deep sea is not a place of blindness, but of specialization. Creatures here see in ways we cannot, tuned to wavelengths and patterns that escape our senses. There is also something poetic in the idea that lanternfish, creatures defined by their own ability to glow, are equally defined by their ability to see. They are both lantern and observer, both spark and seer. In the twilight zone, light and sight are inseparable, each shaping the other, each critical to survival. Lanternfish embody this relationship more than almost any other animal, and beyond survival, their eyes connect them to the rhythm of the planet. Their migrations are triggered by changes in light, the dimming of dusk, the faint brightening of dawn. Without sensitive eyes, they could not time their journeys. Without those journeys, the transfer of energy and carbon through the ocean would falter. Their vision, sharpened by evolution, does not just serve them individually, it serves the entire system. In that sense, every glance they take, every photon they capture, contributes to the balance of the sea and indirectly to the balance of the atmosphere above. So the next time you think of the deep sea as blind, remember the lanternfish. Their eyes, oversized and sensitive, are among the most finely tuned instruments of survival on Earth. They see where we cannot, in light we cannot detect, in shadows we cannot penetrate. They are proof that darkness does not mean blindness, that even in the most hostile environments, life finds a way to perceive, to adapt, to endure. And as they rise tonight, billions of them together, their eyes will guide them upward, detecting the faint cues of fading light, the silhouettes of predators, the sparks of plankton. They will feed, they will scatter, they will survive. And then, at the first hint of dawn, those same eyes will guide them downward again, back into the twilight, back into the safety of shadows, back into the world where their vision reigns. It is a cycle as old as their lineage, repeated endlessly, sustained by the remarkable design of eyes that pierce the dark. For all their abundance, for all their influence, lanternfish remain strangely hidden. They are not mythical beasts that appear once in a generation, nor fragile species clinging to survival. They are among the most numerous vertebrates on Earth, moving through every ocean in staggering numbers. And yet, to most people, their existence is a complete mystery. They do not show up in textbooks for children. They do not appear in popular documentaries the way whales or sharks do. Their name rarely crosses into everyday conversation. They are silent travellers, passing through the water unseen, shaping the world without anyone noticing. The reasons for this obscurity begin with geography. Lanternfish live in the twilight zone, a realm too deep for divers and too dim for satellites, too far for casual observation, but not so deep that it invites the drama of the abyss. It is a middle world, hard to reach, hard to study, and easy to ignore. For centuries we had no tools to penetrate it. We knew of the surface, where nets could be cast, and of the shallows, where reefs glowed with colour. But the twilight zone was hidden. It is still hidden. Our glimpses into it come from machines and submersibles, not from direct, regular experience. And so lanternfish, despite their abundance, slip out of public awareness. Another reason is their size. They are small, rarely longer than your hand. To a human eye, trained to notice the large and the spectacular, they do not stand out. They are not grand like a whale breaching, not fearsome like a shark's fin slicing the surface. If you pulled one from the water, you might think it unremarkable, a slender silver fish with faint specks along its body. Only under the right conditions would you notice the glow of its photophores, the sparks that give it its name. But even then, the light is subtle, designed for concealment, not display. Lanternfish do not impress by appearance. Their power lies in numbers, in patterns, in persistence. Qualities that are harder to recognize at a glance. Silence is also part of the mystery. Unlike dolphins, they do not call across the water. Unlike whales, they do not sing. Unlike seabirds, they do not gather in noisy colonies above the waves. Their lives unfold in near total quiet. The only sound they make is the faint flutter of bodies moving through water, the collective motion of billions, too soft for us to hear. In an ocean where some species advertise themselves boldly, lanternfish remain hidden, content to leave no signal behind. And yet their mystery is not only a product of human limitation, it is also an evolved strategy. Their invisibility protects them. By staying in the depths during the day, they avoid the eyes of surface predators. By glowing just enough to erase their silhouettes, they evade detection in the twilight. By rising only at night, they reduce the risk of being seen. Even their migrations are silent, hidden beneath the surface, unnoticed by anyone who is not specifically looking for them. In every way, lanternfish are designed to go unseen. Their survival depends on it. But this invisibility carries another effect. Even scientists struggle to study them. Nets brought up from the depths damage their delicate bodies, leaving only fragments. Sonar shows their presence but not their details. Submersibles offer glimpses, but the fish scatter at the intrusion of lights and engines. The twilight zone resists observation, and lanternfish embody that resistance. We know they are there. We know they are abundant. We know they migrate and glow. But much beyond that remains elusive. How long do they live? How exactly do they coordinate migrations across such vast numbers? What subtle signals guide their behaviour? The answers remain out of reach, hidden in the silent world where they thrive. This silence is ironic when you consider their importance. Lanternfish play a central role in the ocean's food web. They feed countless predators, regulate plankton populations, and transport carbon into the depths. Their migrations are among the largest movements of life on Earth. By all measures, they should be famous, as familiar as the animals of the savannah or the Arctic. And yet they are absent from our imagination. Their silence shields them from predators, but it also shields them from recognition. Think for a moment about the contrast. Whales breach, and people gather to watch. Sharks appear in films, and they become symbols of power and fear. Even small fish like clownfish capture attention through colour and story. Lanternfish, in their quiet abundance, remain uncelebrated. They are rulers without crowns, workers without acknowledgement, travellers without witnesses. Their mystery is not because they are rare, but because they have mastered the art of remaining unnoticed. That mastery, however, may not last forever. Human curiosity continues to push deeper into the ocean. Advances in technology give us new ways to observe and measure. Submersibles dive further, cameras capture faint light, sensors detect movements invisible to the naked eye. Each year we learn a little more about the twilight zone and the creatures within it. Lanternfish, once silent and hidden, are gradually becoming subjects of study. Their silence is being broken, not by them, but by us. And with that recognition comes a responsibility. If we acknowledge their role, we must also acknowledge their vulnerability. Lanternfish may seem endless in number, but ecosystems built on their abundance are delicate. Overfishing, climate change, pollution, all of these can disrupt the balance. If we harvest them recklessly, we risk collapsing the food chains that depend on them. If we alter their environment, we risk weakening the migrations that sustain the ocean. Their silence does not mean immunity, it means fragility, a dependence on the balance that has allowed them to thrive for millions of years. Still, there is resilience in their mystery. They have survived through eras when predators rose and fell, through ice ages and warm periods, through currents that shifted and seas that changed. Their silence has protected them. Their invisibility has ensured their persistence, and perhaps that will continue, even in the face of human intrusion. Lanternfish are not flashy, but they are steady. Their mystery is not weakness, it is strength. Imagine them now, scattered across the globe, moving silently through the twilight. Billions of small bodies, each one glowing faintly, each one tuned to rhythms older than history. They rise at night unseen by us and feed under the cover of darkness. They sink at dawn, vanishing into the depths. Their migrations continue without sound, without spectacle, without recognition. And yet, the ocean depends on them. The planet depends on them. Their silence does not diminish their power. It defines it. In a way, lanternfish remind us that the most important forces in the world are often the least noticed. Our own lives depend on quiet systems we rarely think about. The air filtered by forests, the water cycled by rivers, the pollination carried out by insects. Lanternfish belong to that category, essential but silent, sustaining without seeking acknowledgement. Their mystery is not an accident. It is the way life often works, with foundations laid in silence, invisible but indispensable. And so, they remain silent travellers, unknown to most, uncelebrated by many, but central to the balance of the sea. Their mystery is not a gap in knowledge to be filled. It is a reminder that some things endure without recognition, that silence itself can be a kind of power, and that influence does not always need to announce itself loudly. Lanternfish carry that truth with them, flickering faintly in the depths, guiding the rhythms of the ocean in ways we can barely comprehend. When humans first turned their attention to the deep sea, they expected silence. It seemed natural to assume that below a certain depth there would be only stillness, only emptiness, only pressure and darkness. The early explorers of the oceans thought of the abyss as barren, a place too hostile for life, a desert of water stretching endlessly down. But in the 20th century, as technology brought us new ways of sensing the world beneath the waves, that assumption was overturned. The abyss was not silent at all. It was filled with echoes. Sonar was the key that opened this realization. Developed during wartime to track submarines, it worked on a simple principle: send out a pulse of sound, wait for the echo, and measure how long it takes to return. The timing reveals distance, the strength reveals density, and the pattern reveals shape. With sonar, the ocean floor could be mapped, obstacles could be detected, and hidden submarines could be traced. It was for naval strategy, revolutionary. But what startled operators most was not the seafloor or the submarines. It was the unexpected echoes that came from layers in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of meters below the surface, that moved up and down with the time of day. At first, they called it the deep scattering layer. It looked, on sonar screens, like a false bottom, a surface of reflection that should not have existed. During the day it sat deep, sometimes as far as 800 meters down. At night, it rose closer to the surface, as if the ocean floor itself were lifting. Submariners noticed that this false bottom shifted consistently, rising after sunset, sinking after sunrise. It was so regular that navigators began to account for it, charting their paths with this strange moving layer in mind. The discovery puzzled everyone. What could cause a dense reflective layer suspended in the ocean? The explanation came slowly, through observation, sampling, and analysis. The echoes were not from rock or sediment. They were from life. Billions upon billions of small organisms, including lanternfish, were packed so densely that sonar bounced off them as though they were a solid surface. The false bottom was not false at all. It was a living layer, moving up and down each day in the largest migration on Earth. This was one of the great accidental discoveries of marine science. Nobody set out to find lanternfish with sonar. Nobody expected the abyss to pulse with such density of life. The revelation came through instruments designed for warfare, pressed into service for exploration. In the process, we uncovered a hidden truth. The deep sea was not empty. It was alive with motion, structured by rhythms more vast and consistent than anything seen on land. Lanternfish were at the centre of this discovery. They made up a significant portion of the scattering layer, their bodies reflective to sonar, their numbers overwhelming. The daily ascent and descent of lanternfish, multiplied by billions, produced the moving echoes that baffled early operators. What had seemed like mystery noise turned out to be the heartbeat of the ocean. For the first time, humans glimpsed the scale of life in the Twilight Zone, not through direct sight but through sound. This was more than just a scientific curiosity. It was a shift in perception. Before sonar, the ocean below a few hundred meters was imagined as sparse, populated by rare oddities like anglerfish or giant squid. With sonar, we learned that the midwaters teemed with life, dense enough to create global patterns of reflection. Lanternfish were no longer minor figures. They were revealed as one of the dominant players in the largest ecosystem on the planet. Submarines added to the story in unexpected ways. During World War II, both Allied and Axis vessels reported strange sonar returns, layers that seemed to rise at night and sink during the day. Some believed they were natural phenomena, others suspected decoys or traps. But after the war, scientists studied the reports more closely and confirmed that what submariners had seen was the scattering layer, alive with migrating fish. Submarines, built for secrecy and war, had stumbled into one of the greatest biological discoveries of the century. Later, as research subs advanced, scientists were able to dive into the Twilight Zone themselves. From those vantage points, the echoes gained form. They saw schools of lanternfish drifting like clouds, moving in unison, their bodies flashing faintly as photophores fired. What sonar had hinted at, human eyes now confirmed. The abyss was filled with life, structured by migrations so vast that they dwarfed anything we knew on land. It is strange to think that one of the most important revelations about the ocean came not from curiosity alone, but from accident. Technology built for war revealed the peaceable abundance of fish. Machines designed to track submarines ended up tracking migrations instead. The echoes of the abyss were not hostile threats, but reminders that life thrives even in the places we least expect. Lanternfish, silent and unassuming, became central to this new picture. The echoes also carried another lesson. That much of the ocean is invisible to us until we invent the right tools. Without sonar, lanternfish would have remained obscure, their migrations unknown, their abundance unmeasured. We would still think of the deep as barren, still imagine the abyss as lifeless. Sonar revealed what nets could not capture, what eyes could not see. It reminded us that discovery often depends on accident, on chance encounters between technology and nature. Even today, sonar continues to teach us about lanternfish. Modern acoustic surveys map their movements across entire oceans, tracking how their layers shift with seasons, currents, and climate, and researchers can estimate biomass, migration timing, even changes in population density over time. Each ping of sound becomes a measurement of life, a signal bouncing back from billions of small bodies moving silently in the dark. The abyss speaks in echoes, and lanternfish are its loudest voice. And yet, despite all this, the mystery remains. Sonar shows presence but not detail. It reveals the mass but not the individual. It tells us that lanternfish are there, but not how they live, not how they interact, not how they experience their world. For that, we still need submersibles, cameras, and luck. The echoes are only the beginning, a map without the texture of the land. The full story remains hidden, waiting in the depths. There is something fitting about that. Lanternfish thrive on mystery. They live in silence, travel in darkness, hide in plain sight. Their very survival depends on remaining unseen, and so, even as sonar reveals their movements, their essence remains elusive. The echoes tell us enough to recognise their importance, but not enough to erase their anonymity. They remain silent travellers even when machines uncover their paths. Imagine it now, a submarine drifting through the twilight zone, instruments humming softly, sonar pulses radiating outward. The screens show a dense layer ahead, a false bottom that rises and falls. The crew knows it is not rock, not enemy craft, but life. Billions of small fish, drifting silently, glowing faintly, unseen by human eyes but unmistakable in echo. The abyss, once thought empty, now sings back with life. The lanternfish, rulers of the unseen, reveal themselves not in light or sound of their own, but in the echoes of the machines that stumbled upon them. That is how we first learned their scale. Not through grand expeditions or heroic discoveries, but through accidents, through sonar pings bouncing off bodies too numerous to ignore. The abyss gave us echoes, and in those echoes we found life. Lanternfish have been there all along, silent, abundant, essential. Only when we listened closely did we hear them, not in their voices but in the reflections of our own. For most of history, humans lived their lives without ever knowing lanternfish existed. We fished the shallows, hunted the coasts, and built our knowledge of the ocean around the creatures we could see. Whales, dolphins, cod, salmon, tuna. These were the animals that entered our stories, our economies, our myths. The lanternfish, hiding in the twilight zone, never made it into our imagination. They were too deep, too small, too silent. And yet, even without our awareness, they have always been shaping the world we live in. When people first began to realise the scale of lanternfish abundance in the 20th century, it sparked both fascination and temptation. Billions of tons of biomass moving through the ocean every night seemed like an endless resource. In an age when fisheries for familiar species were collapsing under the weight of overharvesting, the thought of tapping into the lanternfish population felt like finding a hidden bank account, a reserve of wealth untouched by human hands. Reports began to circulate about the potential for harvesting them on a massive scale, grinding them into fish meal for livestock, pressing them into oils, or even turning them into food for humans. On paper, the numbers looked irresistible. Lanternfish made up a majority of deep-sea biomass. If they could be caught efficiently, the yield would dwarf existing fisheries. Some governments and corporations funded exploratory trawls, sending nets deep into the twilight zone to see what could be gathered. What came back confirmed the numbers. Lanternfish were abundant. But abundance on paper did not translate into easy profit. The fish were delicate, their bodies damaged easily by nets, their bioluminescence fading instantly at the surface. Their oil had a strong smell, their flesh spoiled quickly, and processing them at scale proved difficult. The dreams of a vast new industry dimmed as the practical challenges mounted. Still, the idea has never entirely disappeared. From time to time, proposals resurface, suggesting that humanity should turn to lanternfish to feed a growing population. Advocates argue that the biomass is too large to ignore, that new technologies could overcome the challenges, that the deep sea might hold the answer to food insecurity. Opponents warn that such exploitation would collapse ecosystems, robbing whales, tuna, seals, and seabirds of their food source, unravelling the ocean's balance. The debate continues, mostly on the margins, but always with the reminder that lanternfish are both a temptation and a danger to human ambition. Beyond fisheries, lanternfish also brush against human culture in quieter, stranger ways. For centuries, sailors told stories of glowing lights beneath their ships, flickers in the waves that seemed to follow them on moonless nights. Some thought them spirits, others imagined monsters with lantern eyes. In truth, many of those tales may have been glimpses of bioluminescent life, lanternfish among them, rising to the surface on their nightly migrations. To a sailor in the age of sail, watching the black ocean spark with tiny lights, it must have seemed like magic. And in a sense, it was. Life glowing in the dark, unnoticed by most, revealed itself only in flashes to those who looked closely. But unlike whales or sharks, lanternfish never became central characters in our myths. They lacked the spectacle, the drama, the size that captures imagination. They remained background flickers, mysteries noted but not celebrated. Even today, their name is unknown to most outside marine science. They are rulers of the abyss without a place in our stories, abundant beyond measure but absent from our culture. This absence might be their greatest protection. Because they have never been central to our imagination, we have not pursued them with the same intensity we pursued whales for oil, cod for meat, or sharks for fins. Their invisibility has shielded them from our appetites. But as technology improves and human demand grows, that protection may fade. The temptation of their biomass remains, always hovering at the edge of possibility. The missed opportunities are not only industrial. Lanternfish, in their migrations and bioluminescence, hold lessons for science and technology that we have only begun to explore. Their photophores, efficient and precise, could inspire advances in sustainable lighting or bioengineering. Their role in the carbon cycle could help us model climate systems more accurately, giving us tools to predict and manage global change. Their migratory patterns could inform robotics and swarm intelligence, showing us how countless individuals coordinate without central control. In every detail of their biology and behaviour, there are insights waiting to be translated. And yet, because they remain obscure, funding and research often bypass them in favour of more charismatic species. That, too, is a kind of missed opportunity. We overlook the lanternfish because they do not command attention, and in doing so, we risk missing the secrets they carry. They are living systems of adaptation, efficiency, and resilience, honed over millions of years in one of the harshest environments on Earth. If we gave them the attention we give to whales or coral reefs, the returns could be enormous. But their silence, their mystery, their anonymity keeps them in the background. And maybe that is part of the lesson. Not everything that matters will announce itself. Not every key to the future will arrive wrapped in spectacle. Some will remain hidden, silent travellers, whose importance we only recognise when we finally look closely. Lanternfish embody that truth. They connect us to the ocean in ways we rarely acknowledge. They sustain the predators we value. They regulate the climate we depend on. They appear in our myths as flickers of light, and in our industries as temptations never fully realised. Their connection to humanity is quiet, subtle, easy to miss, and yet it is there, shaping our lives from the shadows of the abyss. So when we think about the human connection to lanternfish, it is not one of direct dependence, at least not yet. It is indirect, woven through the food chains we exploit, the climate we alter, the technologies we dream about. It is a connection defined as much by absence as presence, by what we overlook as much as what we notice. The missed opportunities remind us that ignorance has costs, but also that sometimes restraint protects what we do not yet understand. Lanternfish, silent and abundant, remain at the edge of our awareness, connected to us in ways we cannot escape, even if we rarely recognise it. When most of us think about climate, we picture forests, towering trees in the Amazon or Congo, their leaves drawing down carbon dioxide and turning it into wood, bark and oxygen. We picture wetlands, grasslands, or maybe the icy caps of the poles, reflecting sunlight back into space. What we rarely imagine is the open ocean at night, filled with billions of small fish rising silently toward the surface. And yet, it is here, in the daily movements of lanternfish, that one of the planet's great climate systems is at work. To understand why, we have to return to the basics of how carbon moves. Every breath we take, every fire we burn, Every car we drive releases carbon dioxide into the air. Plants and plankton absorb it, turning it into organic matter. But for that carbon to be locked away for long periods, it has to be moved out of circulation, carried somewhere it won't immediately return to the atmosphere. On land, trees do this by storing carbon in trunks and soil. In the ocean, lanternfish do it by swimming. Each evening as the surface darkens, lanternfish rise from depths of several hundred meters into shallower waters rich with plankton. They feed under the cover of night, their stomachs filling with carbon-rich organisms that have captured energy from the sun. Then, as dawn approaches, they descend again, carrying that carbon with them. What happens next is simple but profound. Some of that carbon is released as waste, sinking deeper into the twilight zone. Some is metabolized, eventually locked into their bodies. And when those bodies are eaten, or when they die and sink, the carbon goes with them, falling into the abyss where it can remain for centuries. This daily cycle is called the biological pump, and it is one of Earth's most important systems for regulating climate. Without it, carbon would build up at the surface, dissolving back into the atmosphere, accelerating warming. With it, carbon is pulled downward, stored in layers of the ocean far beyond the reach of light. Lanternfish are among the most important drivers of this pump, not because they are large, but because they are abundant. Their sheer numbers make them one of the most effective couriers of carbon on the planet. Think about the scale. A single lanternfish is small, only a few grams of biomass, but multiplied by billions, their daily migrations move gigatons of carbon. Some scientists believe that lanternfish may sequester more carbon every year than all the forests on Earth combined. If true, that would make them one of the planet's greatest allies in the struggle to stabilize climate. And yet, almost no one outside of marine science has ever heard of them. They are climate custodians without recognition, couriers of carbon working in silence far below the waves. Their efficiency comes not only from their abundance, but from their depth. The deeper the carbon is carried, the longer it stays locked away. Surface carbon may return to the air in days or weeks, but carbon deposited in the twilight zone or abyss can remain there for centuries, even millennia. Lanternfish, by diving hundreds of meters each day, ensure that much of the carbon they move is stored in places beyond the quick reach of circulation. In effect, they bury the atmosphere's excess, one migration at a time. And they do this without knowing, without planning, without intention. It is simply survival. They eat, they move, they release waste, they die. In doing so, they become couriers of climate, workers in a system larger than themselves, agents of balance for the entire planet. It is a reminder that the stability of our world often depends on creatures that never enter our imagination. For scientists, measuring this process is challenging. The twilight zone is hard to access, and lanternfish are elusive. Acoustic surveys, nets, and models provide estimates, but the numbers vary. Some studies suggest that lanternfish account for a major fraction of all carbon transported into the deep sea. Others caution that the scale is difficult to pin down. What is clear, however, is that their contribution is enormous. Without them, the system would look very different. The atmosphere would be warmer, the oceans less stable, the climate more volatile. Lanternfish, in their silent migrations, help keep Earth habitable. There is irony here too. While we argue on land about carbon taxes, renewable energy, and emissions targets, billions of small fish are already doing the work of climate stabilization every day, without notice or recognition. They do not ask for policy, for protection, or for thanks. They simply exist, and in existing, they carry carbon downward, buffering the planet against the consequences of our actions. It is humbling to realize that survival strategies evolved over millions of years may now be critical to our own survival as a species. But this hidden climate system is not invulnerable. If humans decide to harvest lanternfish at scale, their role in the carbon cycle could collapse. Remove enough of them, and the daily migrations weaken. The pump slows, carbon remains near the surface, and warming accelerates. Even small disruptions could ripple outward, tipping balances we do not fully understand. In the urgency of solving food shortages or creating new industries, we might undo one of the planet's greatest defences. That is the danger of meddling in systems we do not yet fully grasp. Climate change itself also threatens lanternfish. As ocean temperatures rise, plankton blooms shift. Oxygen levels in the mid-waters decline. Acidification alters the chemistry of the sea. These changes affect lanternfish in ways we are only beginning to study. If their populations shrink, if their migrations falter, the consequences will not stop with them. They will echo upward through the food web and outward through the climate system, amplifying the very problem we need them to help solve. And yet, there is resilience here too. Lanternfish have survived past climate swings, adapting to ice ages and warm periods, enduring changes in currents and chemistry. Their abundance, their adaptability, and their global range give them strength. They are not fragile specialists clinging to narrow niches. They are generalists in the greatest sense, thriving across every ocean, migrating in every sea. That resilience offers hope, even as we acknowledge the risks. The story of lanternfish and carbon is, at its core, a story of hidden systems. We like to imagine that climate is controlled by visible things, forests, glaciers, storms, but much of the balance comes from what happens out of sight, in the dim half-light of the twilight zone, where billions of fish rise and fall. Lanternfish remind us that stability does not always come from grandeur. Sometimes it comes from the quiet persistence of small creatures, moving together in rhythms older than humanity. As you picture them now, imagine the scale of their work. Every night, lanternfish ascend, feeding on plankton rich in carbon. Every morning they descend, carrying that carbon into the deep. Waste falls like snow, feeding other creatures, burying carbon in the abyss. Dead bodies sink, locking more carbon away. This happens in every ocean, every day, without pause. The system is constant, reliable, global, and it happens whether we notice or not. They are couriers of carbon, workers in a hidden climate system that sustains us all. They do not need our recognition to continue, but perhaps we need theirs. Perhaps we need to understand that our future is tied not only to the choices we make, but to the persistence of these small glowing fish, rising and falling in the dark. The planet's balance is not only in our hands, it is in theirs too, carried silently through the water, locked away in the depths, protecting us from ourselves. When we think of control, we imagine something deliberate. Leaders giving commands, predators chasing prey, forces bending others to their will. Control in our minds is something loud, something visible, something unmistakable. But the deep sea challenges those assumptions. In the abyss, power is not always declared. Sometimes it is exercised in silence, not by domination, but by indispensability. And when we look closely at the lanternfish, at their abundance, their migrations, their influence on predators and climate, we are faced with a strange and unsettling question. Do they govern the abyss, unnoticed by us and perhaps even by themselves? The idea seems absurd at first. These are not giant squid with monstrous tentacles. They are not sharks with rows of teeth, or whales with immense bodies that reshape the sea around them. Lanternfish are small, fragile, and endlessly consumed. They do not command in any traditional sense. They do not make choices that reverberate through the ecosystem, and yet their absence would unravel the entire structure of the deep. Remove them, and predators lose their foundation. Remove them, and carbon ceases to flow into the depths. Remove them, and the twilight zone collapses into imbalance. If that is not control, then what is? It is a kind of governance without intention. Lanternfish do not know their importance. They do not set out to regulate the climate or sustain predators. They rise at night because they must feed. They sink by day because they must hide. They reproduce in vast numbers because predation demands it. And yet those simple behaviours, repeated by billions, shape the abyss more profoundly than any predator's hunt or any whale's song. Their power lies in necessity. The system depends on them, whether or not they know it. This kind of control feels alien to us, because we are used to seeing power as active. A lion rules its territory by asserting dominance over others. A king or queen rules by issuing decrees. A general commands through strategy. But lanternfish rule by existing, by being the thread that holds everything else together. Their control is not chosen, it is structural. The deep does not function without them, and so, in a quiet way, they govern. The question becomes even more interesting when you consider scale. The abyss is vast, covering most of the planet's surface. No single predator dominates it. No single current defines it. No single event shapes it. But lanternfish are everywhere, in every ocean, rising and falling together. Their migrations occur across the globe, synchronized with the turning of the Earth. They are not rulers of a corner of the sea, but of its entirety. Their governance is not local, but planetary. It stretches from pole to pole, basin to basin, connecting ecosystems that would otherwise remain separate. If there is any single force binding the Twilight Zone together, it is them. And yet they do not control by choice. That paradox, rulers without awareness, is what makes them an enigma. Power without intention is still power, but it is of a kind we rarely recognize. Perhaps it unsettles us because it reminds us that not all systems are built on command. Many are built on dependence, on the unnoticed contributions of the small and the quiet. Lanternfish remind us that control does not always announce itself. Sometimes it emerges invisibly, unnoticed even by those who wield it. Some scientists resist the language of rulership, preferring instead to describe lanternfish as keystone species or as dominant biomass. But those terms, while accurate, lack the weight of what lanternfish truly represent. They are not just another prey item, not just another link in the chain. They are the chain itself, the scaffolding that supports everything else. In every meaningful sense, they hold power, even if that power is exercised passively. They govern by being the ones the abyss cannot afford to lose. There is also a subtle kind of irony in how they govern. Unlike predators that stand out by force, lanternfish survive by disappearing. Their light is designed not to shine, but to hide. Their migrations are timed to avoid detection. Their very lives depend on invisibility, and yet that invisibility is what gives them their strength. By surviving in numbers so vast, by avoiding the traps of spectacle, they have built an empire of necessity, a kingdom of silence. They do not need to be seen to govern. They only need to endure. For humans, this lesson carries weight. We often imagine control in terms of leaders and decisions, but much of our own world is governed by systems no one notices. Microbes in the soil, insects pollinating crops, plankton producing oxygen. Lanternfish belong to that same hidden category. Their governance of the abyss mirrors the governance of our own world by forces we overlook. It is humbling to recognize that our survival depends on the unnoticed, not the celebrated. Of course, some might argue that to call this governance stretches the term too far. Lanternfish do not act with agency. They do not control outcomes consciously. But even if we strip the word of its usual meaning, the truth remains. They shape the abyss in ways no other creature does. They regulate the flow of energy. They sustain predators. They bury carbon. They link the surface to the deep. Whether or not we call it governance, the result is the same. The deep bends to their rhythm. Perhaps it is better to think of them as custodians rather than rulers. They do not impose order, but they maintain it. They do not dictate terms, but they fulfill them. Without lanternfish, the abyss would unravel. With them, it holds steady. That quiet custodianship is a form of control all its own. Not loud, not deliberate, but essential. And in a way, their anonymity reinforces their power. Predators cannot hunt what they cannot see. Humans cannot exploit what they do not notice. Lanternfish thrive by being overlooked, their governance unrecognised. That may be why they have endured when so many other species have faltered. Their invisibility protects them, even as it conceals their importance. They are rulers hidden in plain darkness, unnoticed and therefore unthreatened. As you imagine them now, scattered across the Twilight Zone, think of what they represent. Billions of small bodies, each flickering faintly, rising and falling in unison. They do not command, they do not plan, but together they sustain the abyss, regulate the climate, feed the predators, and link the oceans. They are the quiet governors of a world we barely know, rulers not by will but by necessity, by sheer indispensability. And so the enigma remains, do they govern the abyss unnoticed? In every measurable way, yes. The ecosystem depends on them. The climate depends on them. The predators depend on them. Their absence would mean collapse. Their presence means stability. That is governance, even if it is unintentional, even if it is silent, even if it is invisible. When we think of empires, we think of monuments. We think of great cities built on stone, banners flying over castles, armies marching in lines, rulers carved into history with statues and stories. Dominance in our minds is inseparable from recognition. It must be seen, named, remembered. But the ocean tells a different story. In its depths, empires can rise without anyone noticing, and dominance can exist without ever being acknowledged. Lanternfish prove this more than any other creature. By every measure that matters, lanternfish dominate the ocean. They outnumber almost every other vertebrate. Their migrations move more biomass than the largest herds on land. Their role in the food web sustains predators from squid to whales. Their part in the carbon cycle regulates the climate of the planet. They are, by all accounts, rulers of a vast and essential system, and yet they are invisible in our culture, unknown to most of humanity, absent from our imagination. Their empire is vast but unrecognised. This invisibility is not weakness. In fact, it may be the secret to their dominance. Predators cannot target what they cannot fully track. Humans cannot exploit what they barely understand. Lanternfish persist in silence, and in that silence, they thrive. Their dominance does not require recognition, because recognition is irrelevant to survival. They do not need to be celebrated to be essential. They do not need to be admired to be powerful. Their empire is written not in monuments or stories, but in cycles of energy, in migrations, in rhythms that sustain the ocean itself. Recognition, after all, is a human obsession. We want our achievements recorded, our victories noticed, our power acknowledged. But the ocean operates on different rules. It does not care about stories. It does not care about names. It cares only about balance, persistence, and survival. Lanternfish embody this truth. They dominate not because anyone calls them rulers, but because the ocean depends on them in ways it cannot ignore. Their empire is invisible, but it is no less real for that. Consider the predators that hunt them. Whales, seals, tuna, squid, all depend on lanternfish. Their numbers, their survival, their migrations all hinge on the availability of these small glowing fish. To those predators, recognition is irrelevant. What matters is presence. What matters is abundance. Lanternfish dominate not by being admired, but by being necessary. That is a kind of power we rarely acknowledge, but one that shapes the entire planet. Even the climate bends to their rhythm. Each night, as lanternfish rise and feed, they move carbon into their bodies. Each day, as they descend, they carry that carbon into the depths. Their waste and their deaths bury it in the abyss. This process, repeated by billions, helps regulate the air we breathe. Forests may receive the recognition, but lanternfish are just as critical. They are invisible climate engineers, stabilizing the atmosphere without anyone noticing. Their dominance is hidden but global, and yet, because we do not see them, we underestimate them. Our culture celebrates the visible. Whales breaching, sharks circling, dolphins leaping. Lanternfish do none of these things. They do not appear in tourist brochures or wildlife films. They are too small, too shy, too deep. Their invisibility keeps them absent from our recognition, and so we forget their power. But the ocean does not forget. It knows them intimately, built around their presence, balanced on their abundance. This raises a deeper point about what dominance really means. If power is the ability to shape outcomes, then lanternfish have more power than almost any other creature in the sea. They shape ecosystems, predator populations, and even climate. That is influence on a planetary scale, and yet they do not claim it. They do not seek it. They do not even know it. Their dominance is passive, structural, a byproduct of their sheer numbers and persistence. It is dominance without recognition, power without spectacle. For humans, this can feel uncomfortable. We like to believe that power comes with acknowledgement, that influence is tied to being seen. But lanternfish remind us that reality is not always like that. The most important forces may be the ones we never notice. The most dominant empires may be invisible. Dominance, in the deepest sense, does not require recognition. It only requires necessity. And lanternfish are necessary beyond measure. Their invisible empire stretches across every ocean. From the Arctic to the Antarctic, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, they rise and fall together, synchronized with the cycle of the sun. They connect surface and abyss, predator and prey, atmosphere and ocean. Their empire is not marked on maps, but it spans the globe. It is not measured in monuments, but in gigatons of biomass. It is not recorded in human history, but it is older than civilization, older than our species. Recognition will come slowly, perhaps too slowly. Scientists already speak of lanternfish as one of the most important groups of animals on Earth. They publish papers on their migrations, their role in the carbon cycle, their place in the food web. But outside those circles, the name still means little. The invisible empire remains invisible, and maybe that is how it should be. Recognition is not what sustains it. Persistence is. Still, there is a lesson for us here. If dominance does not require recognition, then perhaps we should learn to look beyond the visible when we think about what matters. Perhaps we should pay more attention to the hidden, the small, the overlooked. Lanternfish remind us that invisibility does not mean insignificance. Their empire proves that survival and necessity matter more than spectacle. And in that there is wisdom we would do well to remember. So as you think of them now, drifting in the twilight zone, picture the invisible empire they represent. Billions of fish, glowing faintly, moving silently, sustaining predators, regulating climate, connecting ecosystems. They do not need us to notice. They do not need us to acknowledge. Their dominance is written into the structure of the ocean itself. Recognition is irrelevant. Power does not always need a name. Sometimes it only needs to endure. When we talk about lessons from nature, we often focus on the obvious teachers. Wolves show us the importance of cooperation. Lions remind us of strength and hierarchy. Elephants embody memory and family. But lanternfish, small and silent, offer a different kind of wisdom. They do not announce themselves, and yet their presence carries truths about power, survival, and the unseen foundations of life. If we look closely, they teach us not through spectacle, but through persistence, through rhythms that unfold quietly in the dark. The first lesson is that power does not always mean control in the way we usually imagine it. Lanternfish do not dictate, they do not conquer, they do not impose. Their power comes from being necessary. They sustain predators by existing in numbers so vast that they become unavoidable. They regulate the planet's carbon by migrating without pause. They connect ecosystems simply by following their instincts. None of this is deliberate, but all of it is essential. In our own lives, we often imagine that influence comes only through authority or visibility. Lanternfish show us another way, power rooted in being indispensable, in doing the work no one notices but everyone depends on. The second lesson is about presence. Lanternfish are small, fragile, and hunted constantly. On the surface, that looks like weakness, but their presence is overwhelming. They are everywhere in every ocean, moving in numbers so immense that predators cannot ignore them. Their presence alone shapes the ecosystem. They do not need to be strong individually, because they are strong collectively. For us too, presence can matter more than spectacle. Showing up consistently, being part of the system, contributing quietly but persistently. These are forms of strength we often overlook. Lanternfish remind us that being present, even without recognition, can be the foundation of resilience. The third lesson lies in invisibility. Lanternfish survive by being unseen. Their bioluminescence hides them. Their migrations protect them. Their anonymity shields them from human exploitation. Invisibility for them is not a disadvantage, but a strategy. It ensures their endurance. In our own world, we often equate invisibility with insignificance, but lanternfish suggest the opposite. There is power in being overlooked, in not attracting attention, in thriving quietly without drawing danger. Sometimes survival depends less on being noticed and more on being forgotten. Another lesson is about rhythm. Lanternfish migrate daily, rising at night and sinking at dawn. The pattern is ancient, consistent, and unbroken. It is not exciting or dramatic, but it is reliable. And in that reliability lies their strength. They feed, they move, they survive, and by repeating that rhythm, they sustain the ocean. In our own lives, we chase novelty and spectacle, but lanternfish remind us of the importance of rhythm, of routines that anchor us, of steady actions that build foundations. Power does not always come from disruption. Sometimes it comes from consistency. There is also a lesson in humility. Lanternfish are among the most important animals on Earth, and yet most people have never heard of them. Their name does not appear in popular culture. They are absent from our myths and absent from our admiration. And still, the planet depends on them. They teach us that recognition is not the same as importance, that the most essential contributions are often invisible, that significance does not require fame. In a world obsessed with being noticed, lanternfish show us the quiet dignity of simply being essential. At the same time, their story warns us about neglect. Because they are invisible to us, we risk forgetting them, ignoring their role or endangering them through ignorance. Lanternfish remind us that what we do not see still matters, that what we do not recognize still shapes our world. In this way, they teach us to look deeper, to question what else we overlook, to recognize that hidden forces often carry the greatest weight. Perhaps the deepest lesson is about interdependence. Lanternfish are not rulers in isolation. Their significance lies in how they connect. They feed on plankton, they feed predators, they move carbon, they sustain ecosystems. They are part of a web, and their importance is defined by their relationships. Power, then, is not about standing apart, but about being woven into the whole. In our own systems, whether ecological, social, or cultural, the same is true. Strength lies in connection, in the ability to sustain and be sustained, to give and to receive. Lanternfish remind us that power is rarely solitary. It is collective, relational, interwoven. They also teach us about survival without spectacle. So much of the ocean's life is dramatic. Sharks bursting from the depths, whales breaching at the surface, squids flashing with sudden colour. Lanternfish do none of this. They survive by being small, by being many, by being unnoticed. And yet, their strategy has made them one of the most successful groups of animals on Earth. It is a lesson about quiet endurance, about the strength that comes not from standing out but from blending in. In a culture that celebrates spectacle, this is easy to forget. But lanternfish show us that survival often depends on subtlety. There is also something to learn from their resilience. Lanternfish have endured climate shifts, ice ages, warming seas, and changing currents. Their strategies, migration, invisibility, abundance, have carried them through eras that destroyed other species. Their survival is not accidental. It is the product of adaptations that value persistence over perfection, resilience over dominance. For us, in a world of rapid change, that lesson is powerful. We do not need to be the strongest or the most spectacular to endure. We need to be adaptable, persistent, willing to find strength in strategies that last. And perhaps one more lesson lies in their anonymity. Lanternfish have ruled the abyss for millions of years, but no one has crowned them. Their empire exists without acknowledgement. Their power operates without recognition. They teach us that dominance does not require celebration, that importance does not require fame, that survival does not require recognition. For them, being unseen is not a flaw. It is their greatest strength. So when we ask what lanternfish teach us, the answers are many. They teach us about power without control, presence without spectacle, invisibility as survival, rhythm as strength, humility as wisdom, interdependence as foundation, resilience as endurance. They teach us that the most important systems in the world may be the ones we do not notice, and that significance does not depend on being admired. They remind us that our own lives may be shaped more by the quiet, consistent forces we overlook than by the dramatic events we celebrate. As you imagine them now, rising silently through the twilight, their photophores flickering faintly, remember the lessons they carry. They are not teaching by choice. They are not symbols by design. But if we pay attention, we can learn from them. Their story is not one of spectacle, but of persistence. Not one of recognition, but of necessity. They are small, silent, hunted, and invisible. And yet they shape the ocean. They shape the climate. They shape the world we live in. Their lesson is simple, but profound. Power does not need to be loud. Presence does not need to be celebrated. Importance does not need to be seen. When people hear about the abyss, they often imagine it as something far away, something alien, something separate from our own world. It feels like another planet too deep to touch, too dark to imagine, too vast to relate to. But the more we learn about it, the more it begins to feel familiar. In its rhythms, its mysteries, its hidden power, the abyss holds up a mirror to us. The lanternfish, moving silently through its depths, become reflections of truths we live with every day, even if we rarely recognize them. One of the clearest reflections lies in invisibility. Lanternfish are powerful because they are overlooked. They dominate the ocean without ever being recognized. In our own lives, so much depends on the unseen. The infrastructure that carries water into our homes, the supply chains that bring food to our tables, the workers who keep cities running, these are the lanternfish of society. They are unnoticed, often unappreciated, but indispensable. Remove them, and the system collapses. Like the abyss, our world is built on invisible foundations, and our survival depends on them. There is also a reflection in rhythm. Lanternfish migrate every night and every morning, endlessly repeating a pattern that connects surface and deep. Their rhythm sustains life, even if it looks repetitive from the outside. In our own lives, rhythm is often what sustains us too. Waking up, going to work, caring for families, cooking meals, resting, starting again. These cycles may feel ordinary, even unremarkable, but they are the movements that keep everything together. Just as the abyss relies on the lanternfish migration, our lives rely on rhythms that are easy to take for granted. The mirror reminds us that consistency is not boring, it is essential. Another reflection comes from silence. Lanternfish live without sound. They do not announce themselves, they do not call attention, they do not demand recognition. Their silence is part of their survival. In a world where noise dominates, advertisements, notifications, constant voices, the lanternfish remind us that silence can be powerful, that sometimes what matters most does not shout, that presence does not require volume. The abyss reflects back to us the value of quiet persistence, the strength of steady, unnoticed endurance. And then there is the reflection of interdependence. Lanternfish are not important alone. Their power comes from how they connect others, plankton to predators, surface to deep, atmosphere to ocean. Their importance lies in being part of a web, not in standing apart from it. Our own lives mirror this truth. None of us survive in isolation. We are sustained by families, communities, workers we never meet, systems we rarely see. We are part of networks, and our importance often lies not in what we do alone, but in how we connect with others. The abyss reminds us that interdependence is not weakness. It is the structure of survival. The abyss also reflects our tendency to overlook the hidden. For centuries, people thought the deep sea was barren, lifeless, unimportant. We assumed nothing of value existed there because we could not see it. Only when technology gave us new tools did we begin to realize how wrong we were. In our own lives, we make the same mistake. We overlook what we cannot see, the quiet efforts of others, the unnoticed details, the invisible systems. We assume absence because of invisibility. The abyss teaches us that the unseen is often the most important, and that ignorance does not equal emptiness. There is even a reflection in fragility. Lanternfish seem endless, their numbers staggering, their migrations constant. But ecosystems built on abundance can still be disrupted. If we exploited them too aggressively, or destabilized their world through climate change, the balance would collapse. In the same way, our own systems feel permanent until they are not. Economies, communities, even personal lives can unravel if we ignore their hidden foundations. The abyss mirrors our own vulnerability, showing us that strength does not mean invincibility, and that balance requires care. But the abyss does not only reflect warnings, it also reflects resilience. Lanternfish have survived for millions of years, enduring ice ages, warming seas, shifting currents. Their strategies, invisibility, abundance, rhythm, have carried them through changes that reshape the world. Their survival is proof that resilience does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet adaptation, persistence through repetition, strength in subtlety. In our own lives, resilience often looks the same, not grand victories but small adjustments, not dramatic survival but steady endurance. The abyss reflects this truth back to us. There is also a mirror in humility. Lanternfish sustain the ocean, regulate the climate and support predators we admire, and yet almost no one knows their name. Their importance is unmatched, but their recognition is minimal. That humility is instructive. In our own world, we chase recognition, applause, visibility. But lanternfish remind us that significance does not require fame, that the most important contributions are often the least recognized, that humility can carry more weight than spectacle. The abyss, in this way, becomes a kind of teacher. It shows us that survival is built on the unnoticed, that resilience comes from persistence, that strength lies in connection, that silence can be powerful, that invisibility can be strategy, that humility can be strength. Lanternfish, moving through its depths, are not just fish. They are reflections of truths about life, carried in scales and light, written in migrations and silence. And perhaps this is the most powerful reflection of all, that our world is larger and more complex than we imagine, and that our place in it is more fragile and interdependent than we like to believe. The abyss reminds us that we are not separate from hidden systems. We are part of them, dependent on them, sustained by them. Just as the surface depends on the lanternfish migration, our lives depend on countless hidden systems we rarely notice. The abyss is not alien. It is a mirror, showing us ourselves in unfamiliar form. So when we think of lanternfish, drifting in the twilight, glowing faintly in silence, we are not just thinking of distant creatures. We are thinking of reflections, of our own lives, our own systems, our own vulnerabilities, our own strengths. The abyss holds up the mirror, and lanternfish, in their quiet endurance, show us what it means to persist, to sustain, to matter without needing recognition. Hello again, and thank you for staying here until now. We've travelled together through an unseen empire, following lanternfish across the darkened waters of the abyss, watching how their migrations shape oceans, climates, predators, and even us. And now, as we come to the end, the story shifts from explanation to reflection, from questions about power and presence to the quiet rhythm that holds it all together. Because lanternfish do not live in fragments. They do not end one chapter and begin another. They live in cycles, in endless repetition, in continuity that stretches back millions of years and forward into an unknown future. And that is where we leave them, not with finality, but with rhythm. If you think back to the first moment we entered their world, it was through light. Not sunlight, but the faint glow of photophores flickering in the dark. Lanternfish carry their name because of that glow, but we've come to see that their true illumination is not in the sparks they show, but in the truths they represent. They glow, but more importantly they endure. They migrate, but more importantly they connect. They are small, fragile and constantly consumed, but more importantly they persist in numbers that dominate the sea. To close with them means to acknowledge that rhythm. Each evening they rise, each morning they fall. It is not a performance, it is survival, and yet it sustains more than just themselves. Their rhythm sustains predators that hunt above them. It sustains ecosystems that span the globe. It sustains the climate itself by carrying carbon into the abyss. And in that rhythm, we see something larger than a migration. We see the heartbeat of the ocean, pulsing every day, unseen but indispensable. And if you listen closely, there is comfort in that. The surface world feels chaotic, filled with change, uncertainty and noise. But below in the twilight, lanternfish repeat the same rhythm they have for millions of years. They rise, they feed, they sink, they hide. They carry carbon, they feed whales, they sustain balance. They do this regardless of our awareness, regardless of our recognition, regardless of our actions. It is a reminder that not everything depends on us. That life goes on in patterns older than humanity, patterns that will likely outlast us. At the same time, there is humility in realizing how much we do depend on them. For all their invisibility, lanternfish shape the world we live in. They regulate the air we breathe. They feed the predators we admire. They keep the ocean stable, the climate balanced, the ecosystem whole. Their rhythm is not just their own. It echoes upward into our lives, into our atmosphere, into our survival. That connection, invisible but undeniable, is one of the quiet truths the deep reveals. And so, to rest in the rhythm of the deep is to accept both things at once. That much of life goes on without us, and that much of our survival depends on what goes unnoticed. Lanternfish remind us of that balance. They are anonymous, invisible, uncelebrated, and yet they are indispensable. Their rhythm sustains us, even if we never see it. There is a kind of peace in that thought, that while we struggle on the surface with recognition, with control, with chaos, the abyss continues as it always has. Lanternfish rise, lanternfish fall, predators hunt, carbon sinks, the system endures. The ocean does not pause to notice us. It continues its rhythms, silent and unseen, and in that silence there is reassurance. That stability can come from the unnoticed, that persistence can come from the hidden, that balance can come from what lies beyond our recognition. When you close your eyes and imagine them now, picture not a single lanternfish but the migration itself. billions of bodies rising together, glowing faintly, moving upward like a tide of life. Then picture them sinking again, fading into the twilight, vanishing into the abyss. The cycle repeats endlessly across every ocean, without pause, without spectacle, without recognition. That is their rhythm. That is their presence. That is their quiet power. And perhaps, in hearing their story, you feel a rhythm of your own, a slowing of thought, a settling of noise, a recognition that the most important things are often the most overlooked. That presence matters more than spectacle. That rhythm matters more than disruption. That invisibility can carry more power than recognition. Lanternfish embody those truths, not by design, but by survival. And in their survival, they carry lessons for us. So we leave them here, not with an ending, but with continuity. Tonight they will rise again. Tomorrow they will sink. Their rhythm will continue, as it always has, as it always will. And somewhere in that rhythm our lives are sustained, our climate balanced, our ecosystems connected. Lanternfish, silent and invisible, will keep governing the abyss unnoticed. And we, for a moment, have noticed them. Thank you for listening, and thank you for staying with this story all the way through. If you found peace in this rhythm, if you felt comfort in knowing the hidden forces that sustain us, consider joining us again for more journeys into the unseen. Because the world is full of lanternfish, not always in the form of glowing bodies in the abyss, but in the unnoticed, the overlooked, the hidden foundations of life. And every time we pause to notice them, we come a little closer to understanding the rhythms that hold us all.